The Supreme Court on Thursday is going to hear arguments on this assertion by Donald Trump that the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to him. The part that says, the part of the Constitution that says that if you've engaged in insurrection, you can no longer hold public office. Trump is claiming, no, that doesn't apply to me for a bunch of reasons. I'll share those with you. But I have a larger question. What do the rich dudes who own the Supreme Court justices want? And I'll tell you about that in just a minute. I've spoken about this briefly in the past, but I wrote about it yesterday and published it this morning. So also, are Europeans who support Ukraine getting a brutal lesson about American politics? What's going on with this? And did the MAGA convoy, they finally made it to the border, to Texas. Oh my God, what did they discover? I'll tell you all about it. All 18 of them, no, not a single truck. But anyway, I'll tell you how the convoy is going. It's rather tragic. In the second hour of our program, a secretive U.S. right-wing group, that would be ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, has designed a piece of model legislation that would give big business immunity from bad acts. Oh, gee, how thoughtful. We'll talk about that in the second hour of the program. Also, a quick recap of all the ways our legal system is holding Donald Trump accountable. You know, a lot of us have just kind of lost track of which case is which and what law and who and where. And Dick Durbin is still taking blue slips seriously. WTF? I mean, what the heck is going on here? Well, anyway, we'll talk about that in the second hour of the program. In the third hour of our program, 4% of California's population is at risk. 94% of California's population is at risk from this raging atmospheric river. And we'll talk about that. And if you're in California, if you're listening to me right now in California, check the weather. Be very careful. Get ready. Get ready to lose power. Get ready to be a couple days maybe without power or without water. We just went through this here in Oregon, a couple weeks ago, with really extreme weather that knocked out power to a large chunk of our city, or our state for that matter. Also, Connecticut just became the first state to wipe out medical debt for all the people who live in Connecticut. You don't even have to apply for it. I'll tell you about that and what Phil Murphy is doing, or not Phil Murphy, Ned Lamont is the governor of Connecticut, what he's doing with regard to that. But to start out, what's going on here with the Supreme Court? I find this absolutely fascinating. This whole idea that Donald Trump is saying the 14th Amendment doesn't apply. Now, the 14th Amendment is unambiguously clear. I mean, it's how can you not read, that somebody who has engaged in insurrection against the United States or given aid or comfort to those in insurrection can no longer hold public office? How can you not think that would apply to Donald Trump? I mean, this is a guy who encouraged an insurrection, who led it, she said, go to the Capitol, I'll go with you. The Secret Service wouldn't let him go, but he certainly wanted to. That this insurrection was intended to murder the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House. They came within minutes of accomplishing that goal. They brought a gallows, and they succeeded in shutting down the confirmation of Joe Biden as president until the next day, until, the early hours of the next morning. Now, how is that not an insurrection? Well, Trump is making basically a couple of claims. He's making, his first claim is that he's not an officer of the United States, because the 14th Amendment says that a member of Congress or an officer of the United States will be barred if they engage in insurrection. So he's saying, I'm not an officer of the United States. Well, history says that presidents have been referred to as officers of the United States over and over and over again throughout history. His second defense is that while the language of the 14th Amendment is clear, that insurrectionists can't hold office, Congress never passed legislation putting it into effect. And Article 5 Section 5 of the 14th Amendment says Congress may pass a law putting into effect provisions of the 14th Amendment. Well, Congress has passed a number of laws putting into effect some parts of the 14th Amendment. But the argument that you need special legislation to execute a law that says you can't hold office if you're an insurrectionist is kind of silly. It was used hundreds of times after the Civil War. It was used to keep Jefferson Davis from running for president, for God's sake. So, that's a specious argument. His third defense is that January 6th wasn't actually an insurrection. He's saying, no, it was a tourist visit or an interruption of Congress for a few moments or a protest, but not an insurrection. And then his very weak fourth defense is that the 14th Amendment was only intended to be wielded against people who engaged in or who were involved with the Confederacy, and that it no longer applies in the modern era. Now, this group of 25 of the nation's most well-known, prestigious, award-winning, top-of-the-line academic and pop history scholars of the Civil War have filed a friend of the court brief with the Supreme Court saying all four of those arguments are BS. That the fact of the matter is that the presidency is an office of the government. He is an officer of the government. Number one, he did engage in what should be called insurrection. The 14th Amendment does not need to be activated. It's already been used, well over 100 times. And that at the time it was written, one of the people who was the author of the 14th Amendment gave a speech in which he said, this is not just for now, this is for future generations. So all four of those arguments are specious. But here's the thing, the Supreme Court can pick any one of those four, or multiple ones of those four, or something else that they could just pull out of their backsides like they did with Bush v. Gore in 2000. And just say, we're going to give the White House to, or we're going to end this prosecution of Donald Trump, or we're going to allow him to be on the ballot, I guess would be the specific and exact way to say it. We're going to allow him to be on the ballot, and if he wins, we're going to allow him to serve as president. So the bottom line here is that the court could arguably or perhaps even legitimately rule in Trump's favor or against Trump. They could either rule, yes, he can stay on the ballot because we agree with one of these 4 points. Or they could say, no, we disagree with all of his 4 points and he can't be on the ballot. But the big question in my mind is why would they make one of those two decisions, assuming that it's a binary choice? There is a third option, and that is that they could rule very narrowly on Colorado and just say, but other states, we're just going to leave it, sort of like the Dobbs decision. We'll leave it up to the states. I think that's very unlikely. But there has been at least one friend of the court brief that has been filed with the Supreme Court begging them not to do that specifically and saying, please, decide this one way or the other so that we can proceed without uncertainty. And that, I believe that was from Dana Nessel in Michigan, the Secretary of State of Michigan. But I could be wrong. It was one of the high-profile states filed that one. But the question in my mind is not just how are they going to rule, but why. And I say this because we have a number of Supreme Court justices. Alito has been being massaged for years and years by Leonard Leo and all his rich buddies. They've got this little outfit next door to the Supreme Court, kind of a social club now, where he holds court. And Thomas, of course, we know about all the literally millions and millions of dollars worth of vacations and buying his mom's house and sending his kid to prep school, on behalf of Harlan Crow, this one, and others. Apparently there's multiple right-wing billionaires. Another right-wing billionaire bought a bus for Clarence Thomas. We don't know yet who paid off Brett Kavanaugh's gambling debts and whatnot, but they were huge. Amy Coney Barrett's husband is suddenly making piles of money in, defending in cases that, well, let's just say exploiting her presence on the Supreme Court. John Roberts' wife has made over $10 million from law firms that routinely have cases. Many of them have cases before the Supreme Court. I mean, this court is just corrupt, or at least the Republicans on the court. There have been no such arguments made about, Kagan or Sotomayor or Jackson. But this is the question in my mind is I guarantee you. Well, I can't guarantee it, but I believe that at the very least, Clarence Thomas and probably John Roberts and Sam Alito are getting phone calls from these right-wing billionaire donors who some of whom don't want Trump on the ticket because they think that there's no way he can win. I mean, they're just looking at the polling, and Biden's. I realize right now the polling shows that Trump is beating Biden. I'm not believing it, and I don't think they do either. So are they going to say to Thomas and Roberts and company on the Supreme Court, are the rich people who own them, who they almost always rule in favor of and have for decades now, are those rich people going to tell them, yeah, we can handle Trump? Fritz Tyson, notwithstanding, Fritz Tyson, of course, in 1933 was the guy who put up the 3 million Reichsmarks, Deutschmarks, that got Hitler into the race, essentially, to become chancellor, and he was the guy who lobbied von Papen to make him chancellor. He wrote a book called I Paid Hitler about how he thought he could control Hitler because he was one of the richest guys in Germany. Didn't work out that way. He and his family had to flee the country. But anyhow, either these rich guys who own the Supreme Court are thinking we can control Trump, in which case the Supreme Court will leave him on the ballot. Or they're thinking, hey, let's get rid of Trump because Nikki Haley has a better chance of beating Biden, which is what the polls show. So, how do you think it's going to play out? Those are my thoughts on that. We'll be right back.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
ties into Justice Kavanaugh's point. In other words, we had a person right there at the time saying what I'm saying. The language here doesn't seem to include president. Why is that? And so if there's an ambiguity, why would we construe it to, as Justice Kavanaugh pointed out, against democracy?
Well, Reverdy Johnson came back and agreed with that reading. Any office is clear. The Constitution says about 20 times.
No, I'm not going to that. So let me just say, so your point is that there's no ambiguity with having a list and not having president in it, with having a history that suggests that they were really focused on local concerns in the South, with this conversation where the legislators actually discussed what looked like an ambiguity. You're saying there is no ambiguity in Section 3?
Let me take the point specifically about electors and senators, if I might, because I think that's important. Presidential electors were not covered because they don't hold an office. They vote. And this
No, I'm talking about the barred office part of this.
Exactly. So the barred office is, if you want to include everybody, first you have to specify presidential electors because they're not offices, so they wouldn't fall under any office. Second of all, senators and representatives don't hold office either. The Constitution tells us that under the incompatibility clause and refers to them as holding seats, not offices. And so you want to make sure that there's no doubt that senators and representatives are covered. Given that the Constitution suggests otherwise, you have to include them. The Constitution says the presidency holds an office, as do members of this court. And so other high offices, the president, vice president, members of this court.
All right, let me ask you, I appreciate that argument. If we think that the states can't enforce this provision for whatever reason in this context, in the presidential context, what happens next in this case? I mean, is it done?
If this court concludes that Colorado did not have the authority to exclude President Trump from the presidential ballot on procedural grounds, I think this case would be done, but I think it could come back with a vengeance, because ultimately members of Congress may have to make the determination after a presidential election, if President Trump wins, about whether or not he's disqualified from office and whether to count votes cast for him under the Electoral Count Reform Act. So President Trump himself urges this court in the first few pages of his brief to resolve the issues on the merits, and we think that the court should do so as well.
And there's no federal litigation, you would say?
Well, that's correct, because there is no federal procedure for deciding these issues, short of a criminal prosecution.
Thank you.
Thank you, counsel.
Ballot before Coloradans cast their votes. Despite this law, petitioner contends that Mr. because of the possibility there would be a supermajority act of Congress to may it please the court. Under this theory, Colorado and every other state would have to indulge this possibility, not just for the primary, but through the general election and up to the moment that an ineligible candidate was sworn into office. Nothing in the Constitution strips the states of their power to direct presidential elections in this way. This case was handled capably and efficiently by the Colorado courts under a process that we've used to decide ballot challenges for more than a century. And as everyone agrees, the court now has the record that it needs to resolve these important issues. I welcome your questions.
Is there an express provision with respect to that defines what a qualified candidate is?
No, Your Honor, there's not an express provision. When the Colorado Supreme Court looked at this, they looked at the need to be qualified, plus the fact that this part was...
So what does it say then? If it's not express, how do we get to this issue of qualified candidate?
What the Colorado Supreme Court did, and if I could have a standing objection, I do want to make the argument that you shouldn't review the court's statutory interpretation.
No, I'm just looking at the statute.
Right. What the court did was to say that we have three important provisions in this section that show that candidates have to be qualified. First, it requires that under 1203 2A, that a political party that wants to participate has to have a qualified candidate. It also looked at the fact that the comparable write-in candidates also had to be qualified.
No, but this isn't a write-in candidate, so we're actually talking about the participation of a political party, right? We're not talking about the participation of a candidate.
Sure, I think that the fact that the write-in candidate also had to be qualified was confirmatory of the fact that the political party candidate also had to be qualified, and it would be otherwise incongruous to read those things differently.
So how is Section 3 a qualification?
Under the reasoning of the Colorado Supreme Court,
no, just on its face.
A candidate must meet all the criteria for eligibility, and I don't perceive any distinction between meeting the eligibility criteria and not being disqualified. I just don't see any meaningful difference between those two things.
Thank you.
You represent the Secretary of State, right?
That's correct, Your Honor.
If you're the Secretary of State somewhere and someone comes in and says, I think this candidate should be disqualified, what do you do next?
Administratively, and what the Deputy Elections Director testified to at the hearing, is that if they obtain objective knowable information, the Secretary can act on that and inform the candidate.
So the Secretary at first decides.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, they're arguing before the Supreme Court right now whether Donald Trump should be allowed to stay on the ballot. I've got a good recap for you on that. But Shannon Stevenson right now is the Solicitor General for the state of Colorado. Of course, Colorado's Supreme Court was who said Trump does not qualify to be on the ballot because he led an insurrection. And her testimony, I think, is fascinating and is fairly straightforward. There's been a lot of really technical stuff that I wouldn't just throw at you and put on the air. But I do want to play this live just for a little bit, just to get a sense of what Shannon Stevenson, the Solicitor General, she's making the argument Trump should not be on the ballot. Here it is.
Arises to that.
This is John Roberts, by the way, the Chief Justice, questioning her.
About one person having a set of facts that they said prove this would send this case to the 113 procedure that we use to resolve ballot challenge issues like that. And if another elector or the individual who brought the information didn't want to bring it, the Secretary herself could bring that action.
Is there a provision for judicial review of the Secretary of State's action, both in Colorado and perhaps what you know about other states?
Well, certainly in Colorado, if any action that the Secretary takes that anyone wants to challenge, they can use the 113 process to do so. I think states have varying degrees of that. There's certainly other states that allow versions of that. And then I don't know whether there are others that don't. I certainly know that there are some that do.
I think we're told that there are states that do not provide for any judicial review of a Secretary's of State's determination. Is that incorrect?
No, I think that's right. And I think there are some states that actually have no mechanism to come to, I think, Justice Kagan's point, or there are some states that don't have any mechanism to exclude a disqualified candidate from the ballot at all. And I do want to speak to that for just a minute about the actual
would that be constitutional if the Secretary of State's determination was final?
I think so. Under Article 2, the Electors Clause, Your Honor, that would be constitutional. States get very broad authority to determine how to run their presidential elections.
Could a state enact a statute that provides different rules of evidence and different rules of procedure and different standards of proof for this type of proceeding than for other civil proceedings?
Yes, Your Honor, I believe it could.
Yeah.
Under the same.
Let's cut away from this because we're getting back into the weeds, and this is what I was. I listened to her opening argument, and it was pretty solid and fairly easily understood. But now they're kind of picking it apart. A couple of things that I think are fascinating about this, and if you've been listening to this or watching it on TV, most of the networks are carrying it. And it's been carried live all over the place. My guess, it's hard to guess. My guess is that what the Supreme Court is trying to do here is figure out a way to keep Trump on the ballot and yet not establish some precedent that might come back to haunt, them and the whole country and whatnot. A couple of weird little nuance things that I caught. Judge Gorsuch, for example. Well, here's, and I can't say this happened every single time, but the lawyers for Trump referred to him as President Trump. The lawyers for Colorado referred to him as former President Trump. And Gorsuch says, President Trump, or as you prefer to call him, former President Trump, which just blew my mind when I heard that. I was like, wait a minute, Gorsuch thinks Trump is still president too? So, there's this court is bizarre. 3 members of this court were on the Bush, were on the Bush team, the Bush legal team, helping George W. Bush overturn the 2000 election that Al Gore very clearly won by thousands of votes down in Florida once the recount was done a year later. But the Supreme Court stopped that recount because the recount would have revealed that Katherine Harris and Jeb Bush had basically committed a crime. They had decided that any ballot that somebody said, punch the button for Al Gore and then wrote Al Gore on the ballot to make sure that everybody knew what they wanted. There was about 30,000 more of those for Al Gore than there was for George W. Bush. And so Katherine Harris said, we're just going to throw those all out. We're going to call them spoiled ballots. We're going to create a whole brand new category. The recount identified that and showed that beyond any shadow of a doubt, Al Gore won the election in 2000 in Florida, which meant that he won the Electoral College, which meant he won nationally, plus he won the national popular vote by more than 500,000 votes. But the Supreme Court shut it down. And they did it because you had, a bunch of corrupted people on the Supreme Court. This is what I wrote about in my op-ed today, the Hartmann Report op-ed, is that, you had Clarence Thomas, whose wife was taking applications for positions in the Bush White House at the time that Clarence Thomas became the deciding vote in handing the election to George Bush instead of allowing a recount in Florida that would have handed the election to Al Gore. You had Scalia, Anthony Scalia, whose son was deeply involved with the Bush campaign. You had, and in fact, his son's boss was arguing on behalf of the Bush campaign before the Supreme Court. You had Sandra Day O'Connor, who had expressed to a number of friends that she wanted to shut this thing down and give George W. Bush the presidency because her husband has Alzheimer's and she wanted to resign, but she did not want a Democratic president, specifically Al Gore, to appoint her replacement. I mean, this is just a corrupt court. And now you've got Clarence Thomas again sitting there, like the cat that just ate the bird. His wife was involved in the insurrection. And he's arguing, well, maybe it wasn't an insurrection, who knows, But anyhow, the basic issues and so therefore I am not expecting that the Supreme Court is going to rule in a way that is consistent with law or consistent with what's best for the United States. I believe that this court, or at least the 6 Republicans on this court, will rule in a way that is consistent with Donald Trump. I'm fully expecting that, based on what I heard this morning. Now I might be wrong. We'll see. But there's a couple of options. They can say, Trump committed an insurrection. He's not eligible. End of discussion. As I said, I consider that extremely unlikely, given how much pushback on each one of these technical points, which I'll get to in just a second, we were hearing from the various justices. The Republican appointee justices on the court. The second option is that the court could say, this isn't really our battle. The 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says Congress can remove this disability. Congress can meet and they can say, Trump, even if he committed insurrection, he's still eligible to be president. They haven't done that, but, so we're just going to leave it to the states or something like, we're going to leave it to Congress, I guess would be option 2. Option 3 could be, they'll say, well, we're just going to toss it to the states because Article 2 is, quite clear. Article 1 and Article 2 are quite clear that the states run elections. So it's up to the states. Colorado doesn't want him on the ballot. That's fine. If, Arizona wants him on the ballot, that's cool too. And, I suppose the final option would be that the court would say, this isn't even something that we should be ruling on. Well, I guess that's a variation on option 2, that's up to Congress. So here are the basic arguments. And then I'm going to open the phone lines and just toss it to you, particularly the lawyers who are, we've got a lot of lawyers who listen to this program. I would love to hear your thoughts on what you have heard so far on this. And so here it is. First of all, question number 1, is Trump an officer of the United States? Because the 14th Amendment says anybody who commits insurrection, any officer of the United States who commits insurrection can't hold office. And Trump says he's not an officer of the United States. President is not an officer. His legal team's brief says officer of the United States appears several other times in the Constitution in contexts that specifically exclude the president. Now, the Colorado Attorney General and Secretary of State and the Colorado Supreme Court said that because the Constitution cites the presidency as an office of the United States 20 times in the Constitution, it makes sense that the president is an officer. After all, he's holding an office. And the district judge in Colorado, who ruled in Trump's favor, essentially, leave him on the ballot, agreed that with Trump that he was not an officer. The Colorado Supreme Court, though, said, yes, he is an officer. So that's the first issue that they're arguing about here. Second, does the president take a different oath? The oath referred to in the 14th Amendment says defend says support the Constitution, whereas the oath that the president takes says to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution rather than support it. So, Trump is saying, I didn't take that oath. That's the oath that members of Congress take. The Colorado Supreme Court said, yes, you did take that oath. It does specifically mention that you have to defend the Constitution. Number three, did Trump engage in an insurrection? Trump is saying, no, it wasn't an insurrection. It was well, in fact, we heard this in the arguments this morning. It was a mob. It was a riot. It wasn't an insurrection. It was a riot. And, on the other hand, what Colorado is arguing is that it was clearly an insurrection. It was an attempt to stop an election. It was an attempt to change the leadership of the president, the presidency of the United States, the person sitting in that office. And therefore, that is clearly an insurrection. And the Colorado Supreme Court agreed with that. And then finally, is Congress required to enforce it? Some parts of the Constitution say, for example, the Constitution says Congress can make laws respecting trademarks and patents to further the useful arts and sciences. Well, that clearly says Congress has to make a law to put this into effect. Does this Section 3 of the 14th Amendment require Congress to pass? Not the case. It's self-executing, and the proof of that is that hundreds of people were prevented from holding public office back in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s under this provision. So that's what's going on. So on the other side of this break, I want to pick up your calls, and let's see what you think about this, and we'll continue to dig into it. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
The court did not use any variant of the de facto officer doctrine to salvage the decisions that were made by these unconstitutionally appointed officers. There is no way to escape the conclusion that if this court rejects Griffin's case and also agrees with Mr. Murray's construction of Section 3, that every executive action taken by the Trump administration during its last 2 weeks in office is vulnerable to attack under the APA, and further, that if President Trump is reelected and sworn in as the next president, that any executive action that he takes could be attacked in federal court by anyone who continues to believe that President Trump is barred from office under Section 3. I'm happy to answer any other questions that the court may have.
Thank you, counsel.
Thank you.
The case is submitted.
The Honorable Court is now adjourned until Friday, the 16th of February at 10 o'clock.
All right, well, that was the end of that. And that ended with Jonathan Mitchell, Trump's attorney. Fascinating. He gave his rebuttal and said, no, Trump is not disqualified. So very, very interesting stuff here. And I'm going to wait to take your calls until the other side of this break. But I just wanted to recap again the arguments here and what's being said and on both sides. Number one, is Trump an officer of the United States, or was Trump an officer of the United States as president? And or would actually, it's not even so much was Trump an officer of the United States, is would he be an officer of the United States were he to become president again, which is a distinction without a difference without whatever. I think it's fairly clear that the presidency should be considered an office of the United States. It's stated so 20 times in the Constitution, which means that it's fairly clear that the president is an officer. But they're going to be debating this, and we'll see where that debate goes. The district court, again, this is one where in Colorado you had two different courts disagreeing with each other about this. This question, does the president have a different oath? I mean, these are the basic arguments, right? These are the basic debates that were held before the Supreme Court today. Does the president have take a different oath of office? Well, yeah, there is slightly different language for the president, and this is in part because of the way the Constitution was written. The Constitution was written over a 3-4 month period. There were different people involved. I mean, there was a large collection of people, some 50-odd people who were there for the Constitutional Convention, as I recall. But there were people who came and went. Alexander Hamilton was only there for about a third of it, for example. And in fact, he kind of took his marbles and went home when he didn't get his way. I forget what the issue was at the time, and left for a while. And then he came back. He went back to New York. So, different people were writing different things, and I would say probably a different group of people who were writing the presidential oath, separate from the oath of all the other officers. But that doesn't mean that the oath is not the same in effect. I mean, what's the difference between defending the Constitution and supporting the Constitution? If the Supreme Court comes down to say, we're going to let Trump skate because those two words are just a little different, I don't know. That's pretty bizarre. So anyhow, we'll as always, we will see where this goes, but and we'll see how rapidly this gets all resolved. But I find this absolutely fascinating. I'll pick up your calls right after this. Stay with us. It's 22 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Okay. All righty, welcome back. It's 23 minutes past the hour. Let's pick up some of your calls here and get your thoughts on all this. George in Chicago. Hey, George. What's on your mind?
Well, thanks for taking my call, Tom. It's a momentous day in our nation's history, and we're living through it.
It truly is.
We'll remember it to the end of our days. I'm not a lawyer, okay, so a lot of this was a little bit hard for me to follow, but something John Roberts said struck me. He brought up what is the underlying naked reality, I think, of the right-wing mindset in this country. Just as the anti-democracy majority currently in the House of Representatives has impeached the Secretary of Homeland Security without any grounds, and have indicated that they intend to impeach President Biden also, again, without any grounds.
Okay.
The Chief Justice remarked that, quote, different people have different ideas about what insurrection is, clearly implying that if they affirm the Colorado Supreme Court's decision to keep Trump off the ballot, well, then red states will come up with some reason to accuse Joe Biden of insurrection and knock him off the ballot. I mean, currently, is it 25 or 26 Republican red state governors have signed a letter supporting Texas Governor Abbott's obstruction of the federal government enforcement activities at the border. So if the Supreme Court upholds Trump exclusion from the ballot in Colorado, how many of these red states will begin proceedings to ban Biden from their ballots? I think that's the veiled threat that the right is making.
Right. Which is, I think, thin gruel, George. I can't see anything that Joe Biden has done that could be interpreted as an insurrection. Can you?
No, but the fact of this impeachment and another possible impeachment means that whether they have grounds or not, they're going to go ahead because it's what they want to do. Right. And they're going to do what they want to do regardless of any underlying justification.
Right. Well, where this would end up then is that, let's say that in an extreme example of this, of John Roberts' paranoid fantasy, that all 23 blue states in the United States remove Donald Trump from the ballot, and all 26 red states in the United States remove Joe Biden from the ballot, right? And then the election is held. What happens? It appears to me that the outcome would probably be largely the same. I mean, it would actually, I guess the swing states. There are maybe 6 or 7 swing states.
That's about right, yeah.
You'd have to really parse that down. I mean, which of those states, who excluded whom from the ballot? I mean, I guess the worst case outcome of that, in addition to the possibility of Trump being elected, would be that there wouldn't be enough electoral votes to hit that 270 vote threshold, and therefore the election under the 12th Amendment would get thrown into the House of Representatives. And at that point, the 26 Republican states, Republican-controlled congressional delegations, would make Trump president.
So by that reasoning, it would seem that Trump would like to see this case upheld for Colorado.
If the red states were to go that extreme, perhaps that's an interesting thought experiment. I think it's unlikely, but it's interesting. George, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right after this. It's 27 minutes past the hour. How do you think the Supreme Court is going to rule? Is Kingdom of Lies, Unnerving Adventures in the World of Cybercrime by Kate Fazzini. This is from the preface. It didn't take me long in my career as a cybersecurity executive to figure out everyone was lying to me. The biggest lie of all came at the very beginning, that cybersecurity is hard, too hard, certainly too difficult for someone who lacks years and years of deep technical training. That is no place for writers. That thicket of incomprehensible jargon alone seemed meant to discourage outsiders like me from entering the field. They told me I could never hope to understand the terminology unless I'd worked around it for a very long time, unless I had a special and complicated certification, unless I knew how to take apart and reassemble a computer, unless I knew how to code in Python and could read it, interpret it, and spot problems on sight. And if I somehow managed to learn the lingo, the learning curve for the rest of it would prove insurmountable. Lies, lies, lies. It's unfortunate because there's a huge gap between the demand for cybersecurity workers and the people available to fill those jobs. I think one of the reasons for that is because people can't imagine themselves doing this kind of work. Can you use a smartphone, make a PowerPoint, think on your feet, ever organize a night out to the movies with your friends that went well and nobody crashed their car to or from the event? Welcome to the 21st century's hottest career path. Are you able to charm the pants off women? Did you escape an abusive marriage? Have you ever hosted a toddler's birthday party at your home? Honey, I want you on my cybersecurity team. After reading the stories in this book, you will understand that what makes cybersecurity complicated is the complexity of human beings. So if you know how to deal with people, you can handle internet security. If you understand what makes people tick, not only will you be able to recognize a threat, you'll be one step ahead of your adversary. During my career as a cybersecurity executive at multinational corporations, a journalist for Wall Street Journal and later CNBC, and a professor at Georgetown University, I've met a lot of fascinating people. From the hackers who perpetrate malicious attacks to the security professionals who try to prevent these incidents from happening, and the alphabet soup of government agencies that do damage control. At the end of the day, they're all fathers, sons, mothers, sisters, and spouses. In other words, people just like us. Yes, the white hats cross paths with black hats and change alliances more frequently than you might expect, but they're driven by the same desires as the rest of us, even if sometimes it feels as if everyone in cybersecurity is allergic to the truth. As a professional, I was told a great many lies about the field I've grown to love so much. After becoming a journalist on the cybersecurity beat, I was told even more. Here are a few. Let me introduce you to the hacker community. This lie is usually delivered with a wink and a nod from someone who thinks they know every hacker on the planet. The truth of the matter is there is no hacker community. Sure, the guys who make a splash at the big annual conferences might say otherwise, but every country, every state, every faction, every identifying group has its own community of people who hack computers. Some of them are extremely conservative. Others are massively liberal. Some fall in between. Some wear suits and ties and work as lawyers during the day, while others look like everyday citizens and have great people skills as they pursue their idiosyncratic agendas. Some are good guys who got fed up with the low pay and boring duties and became criminals. Some are criminals who ended up being good guys. Many start and end their careers on either end of that spectrum. Some, including many you'll meet in this book, are extremely proficient hackers who have no time or inclination to identify with any community at all. As a journalist, I was astonished at the number of people who came out of the woodwork to offer me exclusive access to the hacker community. I couldn't help but notice that the members of the source's hacker community were often people just like him or her. My point is there are many different types of people working in this field, and I can guarantee you that a lot of them are exactly like you. Here's another lie. He's a luminary in the cybersecurity field. He's probably not. Fame and luminescence don't typically intersect in this field. The people I've met who are actual geniuses aren't famous, and most of them don't have social media profiles. They tend not to pontificate on areas outside their expertise. The people who are constantly headlining conferences and who are so often offered up to me for interviews have less insight than those who stay underground. Anything a high-profile hacker is willing to share typically carries with it a massive and crystal clear agenda that I've learned to spot from a mile away. Even if a conversation is off the record, the intel coming from a top government official or other marquee corporate cybersecurity name carries little novel information. The only people who have illuminated the way for me in this world, and in this book, have been genuine practitioners who never held a C-level title. You've never heard of them, and because I've changed their names to protect their privacy, you probably never will. They are luminaries not because of the degrees they've collected or the events they've headlined, but because they carry a lantern that guides the path for others. These types of people typically don't have a public relations team. One of my favorite lies, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This one is usually delivered by someone who asserts that he or she knows the cybersecurity field better than anyone else. These people will brag that they know what it's like to be a hacker and can do things that no one else in the room can do. I'm always wary of those who try to establish their bona fides by discrediting the expertise of other cybersecurity professionals. The depth and breadth of this field is so vast that anyone who works in it is an expert at some part of it. And I have yet to meet someone who is an expert at all of it, not even close. Every view of an incident is informed by the reviewer, what he sees, what her level of expertise is, and that changes over time. It's like asking someone who lives in the Plaza to describe Manhattan. The book is Kingdom of Lies by Kate Fazzini.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. We're discussing the Supreme Court debate this morning, or discussion. The question of whether Donald Trump actually committed insurrection was almost completely ignored. And you had Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson actually arguing that maybe Trump isn't really an officer of the United States, or maybe the presidency isn't an officer of the United States. It sure sounds from the sense that I'm getting is that the Supreme Court is trying to avoid inserting itself into this election in a big way. But I just don't see how they can not. But anyway, we're picking up your calls here. What are your thoughts on this? Eric in Fountain Valley, California. Hey, Eric, what's up?
I wanted to talk about the death penalty really quick. But what I think the Supreme Court is going. Can you hear?
Yeah, I can, and we're not talking about the death penalty today, Eric. Do you want me to move along, or did you want to speak to the Supreme Court?
No, I will say what I think the Supreme Court will do.
Okay.
I think that they will take the immunity case, and I think that they will hear it in regular order, meaning that they're not going to rush it along. And they will hear it, and they will not decide until after the election. That way they can say that they did not influence the election, which they're desperately trying not to influence the election. And that way, if Trump loses the election, they rule the trial goes forward. And if Trump wins the election, Trump makes the case go away, and they don't have to decide on it. That's what I think the Supreme Court will do.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see. Thank you, Eric. Billy in Austin, Texas. Hey, Billy, your thoughts?
Hey, Tom, listen, a great Republican president once said, you can fool some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time. but you can't fool all of the people all of the time.
Yeah, it was Lincoln.
And yeah, it was Lincoln. And you radical liberals should remember that. When was Donald Trump tried and convicted of insurrection? When and where?
That's a reasonable argument, Billy. That's actually a very reasonable argument that Donald Trump has not been convicted of insurrection. I think that's one of the reasons why the Supreme Court did not want to dig into this today, because and that's the key to the whole thing. He has not been convicted of insurrection. On the other hand, neither was anybody else who has been forbidden from holding public office because they engaged in an insurrection. But I do think that that's the strongest argument he has, is that nobody has convicted me of insurrection. Although, well, he was convicted of both the New Mexico and the Colorado Supreme Courts. Both of them have held that, yes, Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. There has not been a federal finding of this, but you have two state courts, two state Supreme Courts, that have both found that to be the case.
So as a matter of law, he has not been decreed by a federal court to be an insurrectionist.
Correct.
So he cannot be held off the ballot in any state.
Well, maybe not. I mean, it depends on how Article 3 or Section 3 of the 14th Amendment does not require any kind of judicial process. It just says any person who commits insurrection. So, and it has to do with qualifications for the ballot. Well, the qualifications for the ballot are determined in the Constitution entirely by the states. So really what it's saying is it's up to the Secretary of State to decide whether, a candidate has, who wants to hold public office has participated in an insurrection. And in the case of Colorado, what they said was, yes, number one, we find that Trump committed insurrection. And number two, therefore, we're going to prevent him from being on the ballot here in Colorado. And number three, we have the right to do that because the Constitution says it's not up to the Supreme Court. In fact, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment even says Congress can remove this disability. In other words, they took the courts out of it altogether. And the reason why they took the courts out of it altogether, and this is an argument that was not brought up this morning, at least, there were times that I didn't catch the whole thing, but to the best of my knowledge was not brought up this morning, was because at the time, Roger Taney was still the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and there were other members of the Supreme Court who were slaveholders and who were still favorable to the South, and they didn't want, these decisions of who was an insurrectionist and who wasn't, or who could be able to run for public office and who couldn't, to be tossed to the Supreme Court. So instead, in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, it says, and that disability may be removed by an act of Congress, by a two-thirds majority of both houses of Congress, in fact. So, it's...
Aren't the rules for federal elections governed by federal law?
No, that's the big problem. There was an attempt to do that in 1993 with what's called the Motor Voter Law. It was the National Something or Other Voting Act, that allowed states to register people to vote at the same time that they get a driver's license. And that's the one and only time where Congress has passed a law that says that we all have an absolute right to vote, basically a federal right to vote. But it has never been recognized by the courts. It's never been adjudicated by the Supreme Court. And so what stands right now is that elections are run by the states, period, full stop.
And so there lies the rub, and there lies the deception from your side. Evil's greatest tactic is to confuse and confound. And the way the left changes the language and assumes things that aren't in evidence and aren't supported by any evidence they could gather.
Are you suggesting here that Donald Trump did not commit insurrection? Is that the essence of what you're saying, Billy?
I'm saying it outright, flat out, he didn't commit insurrection.
Okay, well, that's where
there was more
it's a so then. No, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, and I'm not trying to shut you down or talk over you here. But if that's the case, then somebody has to decide. You say he didn't. I say he did. Neither one of us decide this, right? Who decides it? It looks to me like the Supreme Court is going to punt on it. And again, the Constitution says that the people who decide it are the officers of the individual states who decide whether somebody is qualified to be on the ballot. And those qualifications, are they old enough? Have they been a citizen? Were they a natural-born citizen? Have they lived here 14 years? And have they committed insurrection? And Colorado said, yeah, he committed insurrection.
And I think that's where you guys are going to run into trouble, because as a matter of law, these people, whether they're liberal or conservative on the Supreme Court, have got to decide on the law, and they know the law. So when they come back and find for Trump, and y'all come back to the court, Trump has corrupted the Supreme Court, that's just going to be another deception on your part. And what I'm saying to you, Tom, is when you have to lie to win your point, you never win your point. You don't win your point.
I don't disagree with that point, Billy, but I'm not lying when I say that I believe Donald Trump committed an insurrection. He tried to stop the transfer of power in our government. And that, if there's any
election that he thought he'd been cheated.
That's you and I both know that's not true, Billy. His chief of staff told him he lost the election. His vice president told him he lost the election. The Supreme Court told him he lost the election. 60 other courts told him he lost the election. The governor of Georgia told him he lost the election. The governor of Arizona. These are Republicans. These were all Republicans. 100% of these people told him he lost the election. Everybody told him he lost the election. He's a liar. He's a pathological liar.
Isn't it interesting that the left said, well, there wasn't enough fraud to turn the election, but they never have admitted that there was no fraud. There was fraud. There was fraud.
There's always going to be a couple hundred people nationwide who are going to vote their dead wife or whatever. But no, it's not changing elections. Billy, I need to move along. I appreciate a civil conversation. Thank you very much. But I do need to move along. Let some other people in here. Diane in Ann Arbor. Hey, Diane, what's on your mind today?
Yes. Hi, Tom, for taking my call. It mentions in the 14th Amendment in Section 3, it says anyone who is engaged. So it doesn't have to be an officer. It's just anyone, a human. And it's swearing to uphold the Constitution. And when they said into an office, for example.
No, it says no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president or hold any office. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, I'm sorry. Finish your thought.
Section 3.
Yeah, I just reread it.
Yeah, and it's swearing to uphold the Constitution.
Yep.
Well, I mean, doesn't the military, doesn't police? If you go into, I don't know, if you can't have anything against you. I mean, we know he's done offenses less than insurrection. That seems that it would have held him even running. You can't be in a jury. I was called, I don't remember reading, do you have any offenses against you? And it just... yeah, and then even if he swore to uphold the Constitution during his inauguration, right?
Yeah.
So he's done that, and he's saying, "Well, I don't know if I didn't do the insurrection." He's like a mob boss. All his goons did the things he bid them to do, and the mob boss gets held accountable, even if by direction his goons do it, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes, I mean, not always. But yes.
We're giving us a lot of properness only because he holds the office of the president. But the act is still the same. And I don't understand how he washes his hands of this whole thing. And it's on film. He told them the time and the place and the date to meet. Mm-hmm. And he knew they were armed. Cassidy Hutchinson said he knew they were armed.
That's correct.
And he wanted them to go through anyway.
He didn't want them to go through the magnetometers because he knew that it would identify their weapons. And there were, and a number of them were armed. We now know that for a fact. All excellent points, Diane.
And he's a mob boss that sent his goons after Pence. He even named the target person.
Yep. I agree with your analysis. Whether the Supreme Court does or not, we'll see. I have a feeling they're gonna give this to Trump, but we'll see. Diane, thank you for the call. Picking up your calls, what are your thoughts on today's hearings before the Supreme Court? How does it seem to be playing out to you? I've shared my opinions. I'll continue to do so. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's your media support group for We the People. Right back with your calls in just a moment. Back, John in Portland. Hey, John, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Good morning. Hey, it's a good conversation you're having today. I really am interested. I did not see the news reports. I have it recorded to watch later, so I'm just going off what you say.
Mm-hmm.
But I mostly want to talk about what the guy said about they're allowed to throw Trump off the ballot, then the red states could come up with any rationalization in their minds.
This was John Roberts' nightmare scenario.
Yeah, and I'd say, that could work against him because there's more people for the popular election in blue states, and if it goes to Congress, it'll be after a new Congress is seated in January, and that very well could be a Democratic-run Congress, and it wouldn't work out the way that they wanted to. So I don't know that they would take that chance, and not everyone in a red state is a moron.
Why would it go to Congress after Congress was sworn in? I mean, the certification of the vote happens, if my memory serves me correctly, is on December 14th. That's the old Congress.
No, the first certification before Congress is in January. That's what Trump tried to stop, right?
Yeah, on January 6th. But that's the formal process. But the states have, the states have to submit their certification of their electoral votes by December 14th. And then there's 3 weeks for the electors to all come to D.C. and meet in Congress and cast their votes. I mean, or at least there was back in the 1700s,
Sure, but couldn't the newly seated Congress say, we're not going to accept the...
Not if the previously seated Congress has ruled. I don't think they could overturn that. All of this stuff, John, it's really a fascinating conversation, and all of this stuff, suggests that if, for example, John Roberts' nightmare were to happen, and, a half a dozen blue states were to throw Trump off the ballot and a half a dozen red states were to throw Biden off the ballot, and the whole thing just turns into a cluster, then that could provide a strong national argument and create a strong national consensus around the need for a constitutional amendment to strip the Electoral College out of existence and just say, there shall be a national election for president, and whoever gets the most votes is the president.
And I'm sure that many of your listeners, and probably many of the people who are listening today, support the National Popular Vote Compact. I know that I do. Right. I talk to people about it all the time. Maybe it's not the purest sense of it. Maybe it's got some flaws to it. But it is a lot better than what we have now, where people like me in Oregon don't even get to choose out from the whole plethora of candidates on either party, right? And it's not a democratic system.
Yes, small d.
It's shown up to be a democratic system to keep people from going amok about it, but it's not a democratic system.
Right, it wasn't designed to be one.
That's why I support the National Popular Vote.
Yeah. No, I do too. And like I said, if this were to turn into a real mess, then that actually might be a good thing. I mean, over the short term, obviously, it would not be a good thing, but over the long term, I think it might be a very good thing. John, thank you for the call. Thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay with us. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. One of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. A quarter of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. Back picking up your calls here. Mark in Portland. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
So, Tom, I mean, weren't the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys charged with insurrection on January 6th at the Capitol? Weren't they charged with insurrection?
Yes, and convicted. You're absolutely right. Although Donald Trump was not part of those proceedings.
Well, the problem is that if there's no Donald Trump, there's no insurrection, there's no attempt to attack the Capitol. If he's not there saying we got to fight like hell and all this stuff at the rally, that's putting gasoline on a fire that's sparking several blocks away.
I agree with you, but to Billy's point, he has not been convicted of it.
Well, I understand that, but he engaged in insurrection, right? So the Constitution talks about him being engaged, not necessarily being convicted.
Right.
So, but while those people, the Oath Keepers, whatever, were convicted of insurrection, Trump engaged in insurrection because it's been defined already as an insurrection by these people that are in prison now. So, I mean, that's what those judges did when they set their mindset that they were committing violent acts of insurrection against the Capitol.
Yeah.
They were convicted. Trump engaged in insurrection.
Well, somebody has to, whether you call it engaged or convicted or whatever word you want to use, somebody has to say, yes, this is the case, right?
Right.
Whether it's the Secretary of State of Colorado, Jenna Griswold, or whether it's, the Supreme Court, or whether it's some judge someplace, somebody has to say Donald Trump committed insurrection.
But those are federal judges that decided that these people committed insurrection, right? The Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys?
Correct.
So those judges already have said, yes, this is an insurrection.
Yeah.
So now it's just a matter of saying, well, if we connect the dots, because Trump may not have been convicted, but he engaged in insurrection by giving the orders to go to the Capitol and fight like hell, right?
Yeah. Yes, and this is where I think that one of the big mistakes that Jack Smith made in his indictment of Donald Trump for trying to overthrow the 2020 election, the case that's before Judge Chutkan. I think one of the big mistakes he made is that he didn't charge Trump with insurrection.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah,
unless it's, he just wanted, actually I do understand it, or at least I think I do. I think that what he did was he picked the four charges that he knew were least disputable, right, most likely to succeed. Because he wants to nail Trump, and he wants to nail him in a way that will survive an appeal, and he wants to do it before the election. And go ahead.
Well, let me ask you this. So if he was, let's say Jack Smith did charge him with insurrection, well, under the charge of insurrection, that's what he's making. He would not be eligible to run for president because it's under a charge that, whether it's decided now or later, he cannot run for president if he's charged with insurrection. Is that right or not?
I don't think so. I think that you are, one of the fundamental principles of American jurisprudence is that you are innocent until proven guilty.
Oh.
So, until there's been a legal process, I'm skeptical of that. Mark, thank you for the call.
Okay.
Great thoughts. Carol in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, great to speak to you again. I watched the whole trial from beginning to the end. And just to go on just to comment on the last conversation you had with the gentleman, sorry, I think he was from Oregon, but anyway, he just to argue the point, he has been convicted of insurrection by the Colorado Supreme Court. And it's important to note, I didn't know this, I watched most of that trial, but it's important to note because it was brought up in this in the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court trial.
Right.
They brought up the Solicitor General. She was really good. She was right to the point. She knew it, every single thing.
Yep.
He was asked to appear during the he had full First Amendment rights, and they pointed this out. He was asked.
He had full
to appear.
due process rights. Yes.
Absolutely had due process. He didn't come. He could have brought in anybody he wanted to testify on his behalf. He didn't do that. In fact, he brought in a couple people that, like his attorney or whatever, and he had more time to defend himself and threw that time away.
Yeah.
So he had every chance possible, she pointed out, to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so did the previous one, Attorney Murray, that was arguing. He also pointed out he had every opportunity to present anything he wanted at that trial. He didn't do that.
Yeah.
So he had already due process. He has been convicted of an insurrection. Now the U.S. Supreme Court has that body of evidence right there in their hands. And I think they're just wondering whether or not from the two arguing sides, and in terms of the pro get them off the ballot side, they're looking into thinking that they have to do that. Look what the Colorado Supreme Court did say.
There you go. I got to move along. I'm sorry, we're out of time, Carol. We'll be right back. We'll continue this conversation after the break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that. though, because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone and of his own accord would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him and, by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. We will get back to our conversation about what's going on before the Supreme Court and whether Donald Trump committed insurrection and all that kind of stuff in just a few minutes. But first, Phil Ittner is a regular guest here on Thursdays at this time on the program, and he's on the line with us live from Kyiv, Ukraine. His video blog you can find over on YouTube as you just plug in Philip Ittner. His Twitter handle is Ittner Philip. And Phil, welcome back to the program. I understand that Tucker Carlson's interview with President Putin has gone live on Twitter. Do I have that right? Or on X?
Yeah, it was scheduled for now, so maybe it's approximately, we're told, about a 2-hour interview or something crazy like that. So it may be happening as we speak. I think this is when it was scheduled to come out. So,
yeah.
Just giving an open platform to an indicted war criminal.
Yeah.
And, I strongly suspect, although obviously I haven't seen the interview and I probably won't, but I'll read a transcript. Is Carlson going to really push Putin hard? Is he going to ask him about the children that have been ethnically cleansed, kidnapped, and taken to Siberia from
Over
Ukraine?
100,000 of them, right? Over 100,000 Ukrainian children have been kidnapped by Russians?
By their own reckoning, they proudly state that they have saved, in their words, over 100,000 children. Really just means ethnically cleansed and kidnapped.
Right.
When they say saved, they mean, we're going to purge them of those identity as Ukrainian, that mentality needs to be purged from them. That's their saying. That's what they're saying. Is Carlson going to bring that up with Putin? Is he going to talk about the mass graves in Izium or the massacres at Bucha? I mean, it's not journalism. It's information warfare. And Carlson and Elon Musk are contributing to it. The argument that this is, well, we want to hear both sides. Well, in his announcement about the interview with Putin, Carlson said, we have, no other Western journalist has tried to interview or is interviewed Vladimir Putin. I know the press corps in Moscow. They have been asking for an interview for 2 years, repeatedly. I mean, even Putin's press secretary came out and said
Peskov.
It's not true.
Yeah.
Peskov came out and said Carlson's lying.
Yeah.
The International Press Corps has been asking for an interview with Vladimir Putin, and it's always been denied. So why? That begs the question: why Carlson? Why did Putin and the Kremlin decide to grant the one interview with a Western? And he's not a journalist. A Western outlet with Carlson. Why choose Carlson, who knows next to nothing about this region? Why not get a guy like the BBC's Steve Rosenberg, a friend of mine, who's been there for 30 years, speaks fluent Russian and knows the place inside and out, but would probably ask Putin some hard questions. Right. Putin doesn't like hard questions. So he'll sit down with Carlson, but he won't sit down with somebody who actually knows his stuff.
Yeah.
It's shocking and irresponsible, and it's not journalism. It's propaganda and information warfare. It's absolutely disgraceful. And to see what's happening on that platform, it's toxic.
It's tragic.
You mentioned where to find me on Twitter. I don't know if I'm going to stay there anymore, frankly, because it doesn't serve a purpose anymore. It makes me angry. It's toxic. All I see is hate and disinformation, misinformation, bots. This should not be happening. And the repercussions to Carlson, will probably be few and far between. The Europeans have kind of floated this idea of sanctions and not letting them, travel within the European Union, but I don't think that's going to get traction. Both Musk and Carlson should be really ashamed of themselves.
Yeah.
They won't be, but they should be.
No, I'm with you, Phil. We're talking with Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent in Kyiv, Ukraine. Phil, speaking of shocking and horrific and unacceptable, et cetera, the Republicans bowing to Donald Trump, bowing to Vladimir Putin, just blew up a package that included aid to Ukraine. And I understand that right now the Ukrainian army is having to ration ammunition, and the Russians are taking advantage of this by really ramping up their bombing of the country where you are right now. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I've been thinking about what I wanted to say to you and to your audience about this. And I've racked my brain to think of a more shameful, embarrassing, turn of events to come out of Congress. And, of course, there are many, but this is top of the list. We are betraying this country in a way that is, we're going to feel the consequences of it, for a very long time. We guaranteed this country that we would uphold their 1991 borders. At the 94 Budapest Agreement, we urged the Ukrainians to give up their nukes, and in return, we would guarantee their borders and their sovereignty.
And we included Russia, by the way. There was the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia.
It was everybody involved. Everybody was, and it is a betrayal. It's an absolute betrayal. And it's shocking what the GOP is doing at the behest of Trump, who is clearly compromised by Putin. It is one of the most shameful things I've ever seen. And I walked the streets of Kiev, and I had to take I used to wear a U.S.-Ukrainian solidarity pin, the two flags together. I had to take it off because I can't look these people in the eye. I can't be here as an American right now with the embarrassment that I feel, and the fact that there are Ukrainian soldiers right now, there are Ukrainian civilians who are being hit with bombs and missiles that they could have maybe, knocked out of the sky if they had the proper munitions. But we haven't had a full shipment from the United States, a proper shipment of military aid in months. And we're running on empty, and the strain is starting to show. They are losing ground out east. There's no two ways around it. They're losing ground. Ukrainian soldiers are dying. Ukrainian cities are being bombed. Civilians are dying because the GOP cannot stand up to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is compromised by Putin. This is a crisis unlike anything I have seen in my life. I've covered wars for over 25 years. The Ukrainians will not surrender. They will not give up. Yeah, they're under massive strain. And yes, it does look, in the last couple of hours, we've been informed that the head of the armed forces, General Zaluzhny, has been dismissed. Of course, he serves at the pleasure of the president, the commander-in-chief. So, it's not catastrophic. It's not outrageous. It's not something to set our hair on fire about. He apparently will be replaced by the commander of land forces here, General Syrski, who is a very competent, accomplished general, and it will be a seamless, transfer of power.
Well, that was going to be my question. Was what does that mean? I mean, why did it happen, and what will the consequences be?
Well, apparently the disagreement between the two men, the president and the head of the armed forces here, was over Crimea and how to approach Crimea. And the just dismissed General Zaluzhny apparently wanted to take a more slow and measured approach. He wanted another round of mobilization, large mobilization, and he also wanted a new system of training and take their time and do a lot of work on the army itself before going for Crimea. And according to information that's kind of bandied around here, and I've spoken to public affairs officers with the Ukrainian forces, Zelensky wanted get to Crimea. He wanted to put pressure on the Russians by putting pressure on Crimea as quickly as possible, and that's where the disagreement lay. It's common in war that this would happen. It's not. This is not. It is a show of the strain that's happening here, but it's not catastrophic. What is concerning is the fact that clearly the Ukrainians are running out of ammunition because we're not providing it.
Yeah. And this is where everybody listening to this right now needs to be calling their members of Congress, both their senators 100%. And their member of the House, and raising absolute hell about this. The number is 202-224-3121. 202-224-3121 to get your member of Congress. Phil Ittner. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll resume our conversation about the Supreme Court, Donald Trump, eligibility for the ballot and all that in just a second. And welcome back. David in Los Angeles. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
I've been thinking about this discussion that the Supreme Court has been having, and I have a couple of thoughts. I am a retired trial attorney, and one of the things that came to my mind in listening to this arcane discussion by 6 Republican-appointed Catholic judges gave me the impression that it was rather Jesuitical about these words that and what they mean, and it was very upsetting to me to feel that they have overlooked common sense. If you look in the dictionary about insurrection, there's nothing about a conviction. It just says it's an act of rebellion or activity against an authority. The Article 14 says nothing about a convicted insurrection requirement. He certainly conducted an insurrection and assisted in conducting it or permitted it and didn't prevent it. So all of those discussions with those little nuances have caused me to really believe how fortunate we are to have a trial by jury system in our country, and they're not locked into listening to this arcane discussion by these purported intellectual lawyers.
Yeah, so you're taking this as kind of the equivalent of Thomas Aquinas debating how many angels can fit on the head of a pin?
Yes.
I get it. I totally get it. When Elena Kagan asked the question of one of Trump's lawyers, basically, is it reasonable or fair? I'm paraphrasing from memory here. I'm sure I don't have it exactly right, but is it reasonable or fair that one state could prevent, a person from being on the ballot nationwide, or could basically control the outcome of a national election? That was the point at which it seemed to me, and I think to many other observers, that it became clear that the court is going to punt on this. They're going to leave Trump on the ballot. What say you?
I think that that would be understandable from their political, non-legal point of view. But I think that if you look at it in a commonsensical way, which when I did practice law and I argued before a jury, I would ask them to please employ in handling the decision in the case to rely on their common sense. And this situation illuminates that requirement, because I think the discussion was convoluted, and
looked to me like they were looking for an out. Desperately looking for an out.
If you read the 14th Amendment, Mr. Trump is disqualified, and I think that would be following the rule of law as I believe it should be followed. But they're following their interpretation of the rule of law as they may determine it for whatever reasons are in their mind that are not stated.
Yeah, I'm with you. And not only that, I mean, Clarence Thomas's wife was involved in this insurrection, and he didn't even recuse himself. I mean, it's a real, spitting in our faces. David, thank you for the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. Welcome back. 22 minutes past the hour, and picking up your calls here. Mark in Sauk City, Wisconsin. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Yeah, thanks so much for taking my call. Yeah, it's one thing the Supreme Court should do is actually, eject the sophistry that the Trump team has tried to place into this, because under Federalist 69, Hamilton actually comes out and says the President of the United States would be an officer elected by the people for 4 years. And he goes on to say, and be amenable to personal punishment and disgrace. So that's clearly telling me that Hamilton actually believed that the presidency was an office under the United States, and that not an aristocracy or a monarchy or a despot, that we have to avoid that, because that's what Trump wants to establish is
Yes.
that an aristocracy, monarchy, or despotism, because Hamilton actually warned about that kind of person when it came to Federalist 75, I believe. Said a guy, might be an avaricious man and, want to increase his own wealth when he leaves office, or while he's in office, which Trump did, violating the emoluments clause. They said, well, we took $7 million. And if I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Supreme Court said, well, he's not president anymore, so it's no point in talking about all the emoluments that Trump took while he was in office. Well, now he's going for the presidency once again. And it is just, and actually Trump, it's my belief that this insurrection didn't start on January 6th. It started, prior to the last election in 2020, with his plans to negate the results of the election, right, refusing to form a transition team to accommodate the peaceful transition of power.
Excellent point.
And it just continued and continued and continued. And the whole fake electors thing, which is another violation, I think, under 14.2, because it's supposed to be we the people that select the electors, not the electors that are selecting themselves, self-selecting themselves, right, in violation of the Constitution. And I appreciate your patience when Billy from Texas was sitting there calling us on who believe what we believe liars, that it is just kind of not the most honest thing to do, because it's not a difference of opinion, because Donald Trump has behaved in a way that has been unpresidential, in unprecedented levels that since he's been in office. Mm-hmm. I just that it's just shocking to me that that people are still supporting him, and that he is able to get away with it. And he's even now
there are some men out there, Mark, who are just real happy to have a guy who rapes women as president. I mean, he's a convicted rapist now.
That's the other thing that gets me is that how that supposedly good Christian men and women can support a man who, even before he took office, he bragged about that he was sexually assaulting women.
Yeah.
I mean,
and he cheated on all three of his wives, and yeah.
It just is shocking that they would continue want this to continue.
I'm with you. Mark, I need to move along, but thank you for that tip on, thank you, on Federalist 69. I'm going to look that up. Thank you very much. Mike in Seattle. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Well, everybody keeps forgetting about the full statement about what you can't do. It's not just engage in a insurrection or rebellion. It's also given aid and comfort for the enemies thereof. And those people were enemies thereof.
Well, and I believe 20 of them have been convicted of insurrection.
Correct. And he did explicitly on TV gave comfort.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that never got brought up in the hearings, to the best of my knowledge.
With that, everybody drops that.
Yeah.
It's the whole statement. It's not just the narrow statement that he was, he received, he was accused and proven that insurrection. We have the proof that he gave it comfort.
Right. Right. That's interesting. If Jenna Griswold's office, or if the Solicitor General, Shannon, what's her name, Thompson, whatever her name was, if she had argued the aid and comfort provision rather than the engaging in insurrection provision, I think you're right, Mike. It would have been a much stronger argument.
Correct.
And much harder to refute.
But I wish that everybody would use all the words, not just some of the words.
I'm with you. Mike, thank you. Excellent point. Thank you very much. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll continue this conversation on the other side of the break. Your thoughts on, the Supreme Court hearing this morning, where this might go, how it should play out, what the consequences to the United States and future elections might be, and the possibility of Donald Trump coming back into office. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. I'll be right back with your calls. Book today is Midnight in Chernobyl, The Untold Story of the World's Greatest Nuclear Disaster by Adam Higginbotham. This is from the prologue. Saturday, April 26, 1986, 4:16 p.m., Chernobyl Atomic Energy Station, Ukraine. Senior Lieutenant Alexander Logachev loved radiation the way other men love their wives. Tall and good-looking, 26 years old, with close-cropped dark hair and ice-blue eyes, Logachev had joined the Soviet Army when he was still a boy. They had trained him well. The instructors from the military academy outside Moscow taught him with lethal poisons and unshielded radiation. He traveled to the testing grounds of Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan and to the desolate East Urals trace, where the fallout from a clandestine radioactive accident still poisoned the landscape. Eventually, Logachev's training took him even to the remote and forbidden islands of Novaya Zemlya, high in the Arctic Circle, and ground zero for the detonation of the terrible Tsar Bomba, the largest thermonuclear device in history. Now, as the lead radiation reconnaissance officer of the 427th Red Banner Mechanized Regiment of the Kiev District Civil Defense Force, Logachev knew how to protect himself and his three-man crew from nerve agents, biological weapons, gamma rays, and hot particles, by doing their work just as the textbooks dictated, by trusting his dosimetry equipment, and, when necessary, reaching for the nuclear, bacterial, and chemical warfare medical kits stored in the cockpit of their armored car. But he also believed that the best protection was psychological. These men who allowed themselves to fear radiation were most at risk. But those who came to love and appreciate its spectral presence, to understand its caprices, could endure even the most intense gamma bombardment and emerge as healthy as before. As he sped through the suburbs of Kiev that morning at the head of a column of more than 30 vehicles summoned to an emergency at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Logachev had every reason to feel confident. The spring air blowing through the hatches of his armored scout car carried the smell of the trees and the freshly cut grass. His men, gathered on the parade ground just the night before for their monthly inspection, were drilled and ready. At his feet, a battery of radiological detection instruments, including a newly installed electronic device twice as sensitive as the old model, murmured softly, revealing nothing unusual in the atmosphere around them. But as they finally approached the plant later that morning, it became clear that something extraordinary had happened. The alarm on the radiation dosimeter first sounded as they passed the concrete signpost marking the perimeter of the power station grounds, and the lieutenant gave orders to stop the vehicle and log their findings. 51 roentgens per hour. If they waited here just 60 minutes, they would all absorb the maximum dose of radiation permitted Soviet troops during wartime. They drove on, following the line of high-voltage transmission towers that marched toward the horizon in the direction of the power plant. Their readings climbed still further before falling again. Then, as the armored car rumbled along the concrete bank of the station's cooling canal, the outline of the fourth unit of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant finally became visible, and Logachev and his crew gazed at it in silence. The roof of the 20-story building had been torn open, its other upper levels blackened and collapsed into heaps of rubble. They could see shattered panels of ferroconcrete, tumbled blocks of graphite, and here and there the glittering metal casings of fuel assemblies from the core of a nuclear reactor. A cloud of steam drifted from the wreckage into the sunlit sky. Yet they had orders to conduct a full reconnaissance of the plant. Their armored car crawled counterclockwise around the complex at 10 kilometers an hour. Sergeant Vlaskin called out the radiation readings from the new instruments, and Logoshev scribbled them down on a map, hand-drawn on a sheet of parchment paper in ballpoint pen and colored marker. 1 röntgen per hour, then 2, then 3. They turned left and the figures began to rise quickly. 10, 30, 50, 100. 250 röntgens an hour, the sergeant shouted, his eyes widening. Comrade Lieutenant, he began, and pointed at the radiometer. Logoshev looked down at the digital readout and felt his scalp prickle with terror. 2,080 röntgens an hour, an impossible number. Logoshev struggled to remain calm and remember the textbook, to conquer his fear. But his training failed him, and the lieutenant heard himself screaming in panic at the driver, petrified that the vehicle would stall. Why are you going this way, you son of a bee? Are you out of your effing mind? If this thing dies, we'll all be corpses in 15 minutes. Part 1, Chapter 1, the Soviet Prometheus. At the slow beat of approaching rotor blades, black birds rose into the sky, scattering over the frozen meadows and the pearly knots of creeks and ponds lacing the Pripyat River basin. Far below, standing knee-deep in snow, his breath lingering in heavy clouds, Viktor Brukhanov awaited the arrival of the nomenklatura from Moscow. When the helicopter touched down, the delegation of ministers and Communist Party officials trudged together over the icy field. The savage cold gnawed at their heavy woolen coats and nipped beneath their tall fur hats. The head of the Ministry of Energy and Electrification of the USSR and senior party bosses from the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine joined Brukhanov at the spot where their audacious new project was to begin. Just 34 years old, clever and ambitious, a dedicated party man, Brukhanov had come to Western Ukraine with orders to begin building what would become the greatest nuclear power station on Earth. Midnight at Chernobyl.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. "35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. And boy, there's a lot to talk about, with regard to what's going on here. George in Portland. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. A few years ago, you had Mark Pocan on the show before the election, and I called in and I said, Republicans are staging a coup right in front of our faces, and, we're not talking about it. I think we're talking about it a little bit, but they're doing it again. They're planning on having this election some one way or another.
I agree. I think that, we know that there are conversations among Republican circles about how to support third-party candidates in the hopes that they can prevent 270 electoral college votes for Joe Biden, or how they can Well, that's the main one, actually. And, other ways that they might be able to rig the election. Because, hey, if you can't win fair, you cheat. That's the Republican motto.
There also hasn't been any real accountability for anyone at any high level, right? There hasn't been any real accountability for the fake electors. They'll do that again.
Right.
If no one's held accountable, they're going to do that again.
Well, some of those fake electors look like they might be going to jail. But what baffles me, George, is why only 2 states so far have tried to hold fake electors to account. The rest of the states are like, yeah, it's okay. Maybe 3. I don't know if Michigan is doing that or not. But yeah, it's a good point. George, thank you very much. Chad in Chicago. Hey, Chad, what's up?
Tom, good to talk to you again. Want to make a few quick points on why this wasn't an insurrection, and also support Jack Smith on this point, on why he didn't charge Trump with insurrection. So 2 days before January 6th, Trump personally authorized the use of up to 20,000 National Guard's troops, okay? On January 5th, he put out a statement, and he said this on CNN's Town Hall. He told it to Caitlin Collins. He put out a statement: stay peaceful, remain peaceful, respect our law enforcement, and respect our Capitol Police.
Trump didn't actually tweet that. His chief of staff did.
Oh, okay.
And Trump did not authorize 20,000 troops. In fact, to the opposite, his defense secretary, Chris Miller, published a memo on January 4th that explicitly said that no National Guard troops could provide any assistance whatsoever, including equipment or even intelligence, to the Capitol Police.
Well, I disagree, and you could listen to Kash Patel's testimony to the Colorado court.
Yeah, well, I'm not believing anything Kash Patel says, first of all. And secondly, I've got the document. I mean, the whole world has seen it. Chris Miller's document saying, National Guard, you may not show up, is absolutely unambiguous. And he was the Secretary of Defense.
That day, he was authorized. That day, they authorized up to 350 troops from the D.C. area, I believe.
Nope.
But prior to that day, Kash Patel's a liar, I guess.
Yes.
We'll pin it
absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And like I said, I've got the memo. Wait,
lastly,
Kash Patel's also behind, he's part of this whole 2,000 mules thing. I mean, the lies. Well, anyway, back to you, Chad.
Kash Patel lied to the Colorado court. Why haven't they charged him with?
You'd have to ask the Colorado court. I have no idea.
Oh, okay. If he's such a liar, why haven't they charged him?
I don't even know that he actually said that to the Colorado court, Chad. All I have is your assertion of it. But the fact of the matter is that the Secretary of Defense, working for Donald Trump, the acting Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller, issued a memo, and I encourage you to look for this memo on the internet. You can easily find it. Issued a memo on January 4th saying there will be no participation by the National Guard in any defense of the Capitol. In fact, I think I've got it here, and I'll read it to you. I mean, it's
okay. Well, again, then somebody ought to leg shackles and handcuffs on Kash Patel for lying to the Colorado courts, because that's.
Well, I'm sure Kash Patel isn't the only one who's saying those kind of things.
Okay, and then the final piece, real quick.
Okay.
And I enjoyed talking with you. Nobody, including yourself, and I watched the sham cable show, the January 6th hearing. Not one time I heard you or anybody else mention Trump saying that we're going to go peacefully and patriotically let our voices be heard. Not once. I've never in the past year. I've never heard you say that, and I've never heard MSNBC say that. And the January 6th committee never once showed that clip.
Here is the memo from Christopher Miller, the acting Secretary of Defense. It's dated January 4th, 2021. If you just plug in Chris Miller January 4th memo, you'll find it real quickly on the internet. Memorandum for Secretary of the Army, employment guidance. This memorandum responds to your January 4th memorandum regarding the District of Columbia request for National Guard support in response to planned demonstrations on January 6, 2021. You are authorized to approve the requested support subject to my guidance below and subject to consultation with the Attorney General as required by Executive Order 11-485. So he says, you're authorized to do this. So that's probably what Kash Patel was saying. But with these caveats. Now, here are the bullet points. Without my subsequent personal authorization, the National Guard is not authorized the following. Number 1, to be issued weapons, ammunition, bayonets, batons, or ballistic protection equipment such as helmets and body armor. So, number one, if you're going to help the Capitol Police, you've got to do so basically naked. You got to do so in your street clothes. Number two, to interact physically with protesters except when necessary in self-defense or defense of others, consistent with the DNCNG rules for the use of force. Number three, to employ any riot control agents. You may not control the riot at all. You may not use tear gas or anything like that. Number four, to share equipment with law enforcement agencies. You may not help the Capitol Police. Number five, to use intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets or to conduct ISR or incident awareness and assessment activities. In other words, you may not help the Capitol Police when they're under attack and by providing them with any information at all. Number six, I think I'm up to employ helicopters or any other air assets. You may not use your hardware. Number seven, to conduct searches, seizures, arrests, or other similar direct law enforcement activity. You may not help in any way in the form of what could be called law enforcement. And finally, to seek support from any non-DC National Guard units. And you may not even get help from, because you'll recall, you had the Republican governor of Maryland was trying to deploy his National Guard to Washington, D.C., and the Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller, prevented it from happening. The memo says, in all these cases, the D.C. National Guard will remain under the operational and administrative command and control of the commanding general of the DCNG, who reports to the Secretary of Defense through the Secretary of the Army. In other words, to me. You may employ the DCNG Quick Reaction Force only as a last resort and in response to a request from an appropriate civil authority. So, there you go. I mean, I just read you the whole memo.
Okay, I think you're missing my point. My point was that Trump was of the mindset, and this is what we're getting back to, of the mindset of whether he was able to carry that out, whether that order was ever to be carried out or not. My point, and I'm trying to make it, is I'm trying to illustrate the mindset of this whole insurrection.
You mean when he said you got to fight like hell or you're not going to have a country anymore?
Well, let's go back and we can go through all the.
I'm not going to go through any of it, Chad. You've made your point. I've made my point. I'm going to move along. Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I had no intentions of calling today, but one of your callers called in and stated that if you have to lie to make a point, then your point is not. He said it in slightly different words. Mm-hmm. Your point's not worth making. That's a talking point that I use privately all the time. And I have a lot of things that will fit on a bumper sticker that I never put on the internet, because as soon as I put it on the internet, the Republicans reverse engineer it, and then they come and throw it back at the Democrats. That guy got that from me. And I did it just 2 weeks ago. And it only took 2 weeks for a Republican to get on a program somewhere. And in fact, somebody did it almost in the same day, had to do it to me.
Well, I think it's also an old cliche, Larry.
I beat him down.
I don't think this is unique to you. If you have to lie to make a point, your point is useless.
With anything that Democrats come up with, we impeached Donald Trump because he deserved it. Mm-hmm. So now they want to impeach Joe Biden, not because they have anything on him, but just because it happened to them. They did the same thing with Bill Clinton. This is what Republicans do. They take anything that sounds good, anything that actually sounds like, oh, that was a good point, I'm going to use that. That's how they even gain power. So this guy did that.
Well, that's normal politics, Larry.
Yes, it is. But in other words, when I did it to the guy on the internet, first I went through and proved that he was lying.
Right.
And I went through a whole, just like what you did with this guy.
Yeah.
Your last caller. I went through the whole bullet points and proved that he was a liar. And then I said my closing argument was, if you have to lie to make a point, your point was not worth making. Your last caller was telling lies, and he got caught.
Well, I think he thought he was telling the truth, and reviewing the memo from Chris Miller. Miller actually did say you may provide assistance, but only under these terms. You can't wear a uniform, you can't use equipment, you can't communicate, you can't carry weapons, you can't have tear gas. What it was a setup so that in the future some administration official could go on TV and say, or testify in court or whatever, and say, oh yeah, we were perfectly willing to provide them with assistance from the National Guard, when in fact they had put so many limitations on it, it was useless.
I don't give Republicans the benefit of the doubt.
I get it.
I just don't.
I get it, Larry.
Every single one of them lies.
I get it. Okay, Larry, thank you very much. 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. It's Talk Media for the sane among us, hopefully. We'll be right back with you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. I'll be right back with your calls. Stay with us. And welcome back. Alvin in Greeley, Colorado. Hey, Alvin, what's on your mind today?
Oh, good to talk to you, Tom. I wanted to expand on what the lady from Idaho called. Trump received due process. His lawyers in Colorado, they were able to present a defense. The Colorado district judge ruled Trump did engage in insurrection. This was a finding of fact by a court of law, and then the Colorado Supreme Court reaffirmed that ruling.
Correct.
So Trump has got due process, has been found
at the state level
engaged in insurrection.
At the state level, and you know, although I didn't hear this distinction made in the arguments this morning, but he was given due process and he was essentially convicted of insurrection at the state level. Whether that applies to a federal case, well, I don't know. I agree with you, Alvin. Obviously, but I predict that the Supreme Court is going to leave him on the ballot. Alvin, thank you for the call. Brian in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Yeah, all the Trumpists are coming out of the woodworks to call you today, and two. I just had to respond to two of them. A couple callers ago, one guy was saying, why aren't the libs ever saying the one time Trump said be peaceful? I have tons of video of me not robbing a bank. It doesn't mean I didn't rob a bank. I didn't, Tom. But the video of me not robbing a bank doesn't clear me of guilt if I did. And another caller said, earlier, he said, if you have to lie to make your point or whatever, and I could come up with thousands of these examples. But Trump's at a union meeting a year ago or so, and he has non-union members holding up signs that say "Union workers for Trump."
That wasn't a year or so ago. That was 3 weeks ago.
I thought the recoverage of it was a few weeks ago. Well, whenever.
Oh, well, it's possible.
But,
I thought there were two different times that Biden went to Michigan and Trump tried to follow him. Maybe I'm wrong. But keep going, Brian.
Maybe, but it's not 100%, 0% what I'm about to say. But it's never that way. That's childish to think that way. But which party is lying about what they're trying to offer, and which party is not? Again, not 0%, 100%. But the Republican Party is so guilty of that, and your caller was so convinced that the Democrats are always lying about everything to prove their point. It's insane. What?
Well, here's the question: is what's the lie? I mean, Republicans. When Joe Biden pointed out that Republicans have been trying to, privatize Social Security since 1935, they booed him in Congress, and he said, "Oh, good. So you guys are in favor of Social Security." And then we discovered that, here comes the Cat Food Commission. They're going to try and privatize Social Security, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, they tell you that they're going to try and cut your taxes when in fact they want to cut the taxes for the billionaires. Donald Trump campaigned on bringing our jobs home. He didn't bring our jobs home. In fact, actually, his NAFTA deal, his redone NAFTA deal, gave corporations a big tax break if they moved their factories to Mexico. Donald Trump did that.
Yeah.
I mean, he actually increased the export of American jobs. And yet everybody thinks, oh, Donald Trump saved us all, saved it. It's crazy. Brian, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's your points are very well made. 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay with us. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So back in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, we were in the depths of the Great Depression. He raised the top income tax rate on billionaires from 25% to 90%. The ultra-rich were screaming, and here's what he had to say.
A number of my friends who belong in these very high upper brackets have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am re-elected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
He just took it right to them, all right? Now, what came out of that was the world's largest and fastest growing and first major middle class. We can do this again. We just have to raise taxes on rich people. It's pretty straightforward. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls. Thank you, Mark. Let's see here. Brett in Oakview, California. Hey, Brett, what's up?
Hey, good morning. I listened to as much of the Supreme Court hearing this morning as I could, and I got the same impression you did, that they were just sort of looking for an excuse to take it away from them so that they wouldn't be held responsible for any kind of action. So they would rather defer to the side of inaction. But it was kind of Harry Littman wrote a great piece back on December 19th. I read it in the LA Times. It probably appeared in any number of papers across the country that he gave a list of 3 or 4 of their options of what they probably could do. And then he said, finally, the Supreme Court could hold that the Colorado justices shouldn't have taken up this question in the first place. The rationale would be that Section 3 is qualitatively different from the other constitutional qualifications and isn't susceptible to court resolution. And maybe having that in mind this morning while I was listening to the judges skewed my perspective, but it sure seemed like a lot of their questions to either the plaintiff's attorneys or the defendant's attorneys were kind of geared that way. So I think basically they're going to say that, the Supreme Court of Colorado shouldn't have taken it up in the first place. And then if you want to take it a step further, I do think they're going to not grant certiorari to the Chutkan case regarding immunity. So I agree. They're going to leave him on the ballots, but they're going to leave it up to the courts to determine whether he was guilty of the election interference in 2020. That's the main federal Jack Smith case.
Right. Which raises an interesting question, Brett. I'm sorry, finish your thought.
Go ahead. Well, it basically becomes the path of least resistance for the Supreme Court and to let the other courts do the work for them so that they
which raises the question, why is the court trying so hard to avoid knocking Donald Trump off the ballot? Is it because they think that, it's the right thing? Or is it because they're terrified of his minions, showing up and burning their houses down or something?
B.
Yeah, I think so too. B. I think they're scared. I really do.
Well, and I don't know that they're not.
I think it's a legitimate fear, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know that they're not justified in that fear. I mean, we've seen what happens when the former president gets his minions all stirred up, January 6th, which brings up all kinds of points that I didn't call to make. But like I said, I think they're going to determine that the Supreme Court of Colorado shouldn't have taken it up, basically nullify their results, leave Trump on the ballot. And then with that, all the other states don't have to begin engaging in the same process of whether Trump does or doesn't belong on the ballot. And we certainly know which states would vote, which states would rule which ways.
Exactly. No, I got it.
Like I said, I think the Chutkan immunity case is going to get kicked back. And
there's no doubt about that in my mind. I completely agree with you. Brett, thank you very much. Kevin in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Hi, I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
So the question has come up over and over that about Trump was not convicted of insurrection.
Correct.
And what I want to know, and I can't find it, is what law was there against insurrection in 1868 that they could have been expecting that he would have had to have been convicted of?
Insurrection has been illegal since the founding of the Republic. And there's, in fact, a law that was passed in the 1790s called the Insurrection Act. That specifically refers to that. And Trump was found guilty of insurrection, by the way, by a Colorado District Court and then by the Colorado Supreme Court. They both found him guilty of insurrection.
That law from the 1790s has to do with deploying the military. I didn't see that it actually made insurrection illegal. So that's basically my problem with this. This morning they were referring
I don't think George Washington would have ridden to put down Shays' Rebellion or the Whiskey Rebellion, whichever one it was that he went personally on, if he thought it was legal.
Well, but I don't see that they would have been requiring that he be convicted in 1868.
Right. Well,
unless a law existed. That's all.
Kevin, I'm not sufficiently conversant with laws around insurrection to know if they're to know what the specific law is, but I would be astonished if insurrection was not illegal. Kevin, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's a really big day, and we're kind of processing what happened in the Supreme Court this morning. Donald Trump, is he guilty of insurrection? Is the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment self-executing? Is Donald Trump an officer of the United States? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a growing consensus. I've been, during the breaks here, checking out the commentators on TV and also, reading the various newspapers and whatnot that I can find online. And the growing consensus is that the Supreme Court is going to say, sorry, Colorado, you can't keep him off the ballot. There may be a couple of different rationalizations for this. One could be the officer of the United States rationalization. Another could be that the 14th Amendment's not self-executing. These are highly technical. And that's probably the kind of thing the Supreme Court is going to want to go with, because it's going to cause the average person to go, oh, I guess this is all that legal highfalutin stuff that only, top-notch lawyers and Supreme Court justices understand. I think the biggest shock for me this morning was that Clarence Thomas was sitting there after his wife engaged in this insurrection, deciding whether Donald Trump should be kept off the ballot for engaging in an insurrection with Clarence Thomas's wife. I mean, that's pretty breathtaking, really, when you think about it. So, all that said, let's continue our conversation. Pick up your calls here. Jim in Lone Tree, Colorado. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind?
Yeah, with the Supreme Court accepting this case, isn't that an admission that he did commit insurrection, and that they're just trying to decide if he is disqualified or not? And no. I haven't heard any judge say he's not guilty of insurrection. So,
well, and in fact, the Supreme Court of Colorado said that he is guilty of insurrection, although they did not provide any specific penalty and they didn't cite any specific statute. But they said, for purposes of the 14th Amendment, what Donald Trump did was insurrection. And that was ruled by the district judge as well as by the Supreme Court, the Colorado Supreme Court. Oh, I just lost my caller. I'm sorry about that. I don't know if you dropped or I dropped you, but I think you must have dropped off. Clay in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Hey, Clay, what's on your mind this morning?
Hi. I guess first let me just make a quick comment to Billy that called about and mentioned that he thought that Donald Trump believed that he had been cheated.
Yeah.
Well, that's obviously not the case, because every single time Donald Trump has ever lost anything, he has claimed fraud, and even before he loses, he claims fraud.
Right. And lies about it. Well, not only that, in 2016, he and Roger Stone had already registered Stop the Steal as a website.
That's my point.
He was going to do this in 2016 if he lost, as he fully expected to lose. And then in 2020, by the summer of 2020, when it was obvious he was not going to win the re-election, I mean, his poll numbers were just in the tank. At that point, he began ginning up this idea that there was voter fraud and all this. I mean, he saw this coming. He knew what was going on.
Yeah. So for the case in the court, the Supreme Court, to me, it seems like I think that most of the judges had reasonable concerns and questions, except for Clarence Thomas asking about historical precedent or whatever. Has this ever been done before? Well, who cares? This is the first time, so it doesn't matter if it's not been done before.
Right.
But
We've
anyway,
never had a president lead an insurrection before.
Yeah. So I think it's a slippery slope to give the states the choice on this. Now, they have the choice for age and the choice for citizenship.
No, they don't have a choice.
Well, no,
they have to follow the Constitution.
That's what I mean. Those ones. It's easy to say, that it either is or it isn't. But in a case for insurrection, well, that if you give the states the right to decide on what is insurrection and not, these red states, they're going to just come up with whatever.
Yeah.
And
the former insurrectionist states, you mean, Clay? Like where you live?
Yeah.
In Mississippi.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that I think could potentially be a huge problem if this is allowed to, if the states can make this choice, unless it's very, very strictly regulated.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I
and
don't
my
see
guess is that
happening.
that's what the Supreme Court's going to do. They're going to ring fence this thing. They're going to say, you know, okay, you could have done this, Colorado,
like
if this and this and this had happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they're going to let it happen. I think it's going to be pretty much almost unanimous, if not unanimous, that they can't do it.
I agree. I think the one dissenter may be Sotomayor, but we'll see.
Yeah,
it's going to be,
and as
or
far
maybe
as Trump
Jackson.
Yeah, but as far as Trump doing insurrection and convicting him of that, I think that's also going to be a hard something to do because. His rhetoric is bad, but rhetoric is not. It seemed to me, from what I've been able to understand, is that the people around him organized this thing, and whether or not he was directly involved, I can't remember if there was any direct connection, between him and Bannon or these other people that kind of organized the assembly of the people.
Right.
But so I think that could be it's going to be a hard swallow to get, I think, a conviction on insurrection for what Trump did, even though what he did was despicable.
I suspect you're right, Clay.
And what he wanted to do is despicable.
Yeah, I suspect you're right.
That's my thought.
Clay, thank you very much. By the way, I just looked up 18 U.S. Code 2383. This is a federal law. It was put into law in 1948. Interestingly. And it's titled Rebellion or Insurrection. Whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. Which raises the question again, and I've mentioned this a number of times, and why didn't Jack Smith indict Donald Trump for insurrection? I really think he should, and I don't think it's too late. But I'd love to see that trial. John in Auburn, California. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, y'all. Morning here, sir.
It is here too.
I'm referring to the term chief executive officer.
Mm-hmm.
The President of the United States, Chief Executive Officer. He signs all of the congressional bills into law. He isn't Chief Executive Officer.
I agree with you. Although that phrase does not appear in the Constitution.
Well, it was a comment I heard this morning by William on C-SPAN's Open Forum Part 2, minute 14:50 seconds.
Yeah.
So
no, common sense suggests that he's an officer of the United States. Tradition suggests he's an officer of the United States. I
think that William suggested it was part of the Constitution.
Yeah, the phrase chief executive officer,
passage,
to the best of my knowledge, does not appear in the Constitution. That's a modern corporate phrase. In fact, I think it's a 20th century corporate phrase. I don't think the phrase CEO was in widespread use before the 1940s, although I could be wrong. But in fact, I remember when I was a kid, when CEO, this was in the 60s or 70s, and there were presidents of companies who started calling themselves CEOs, and it was like the prestigious thing to do.
Anointed.
Yeah, and part of it was that they were starting to split out these executive offices. There was the chief executive officer, then there was the chief financial officer, the CFO, and then there was the chief,
operations officer.
Yeah, exactly, COO. They had a bunch of these different chief officers, but all of that, to my recollection, again, I may be wrong, but to my recollection, all of that is 20th century, 21st century stuff. But I think... Yeah, I think technically you're right. John, thank you for the call. It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. A lot to talk about here. What's going on? How's this going to shake out? Where are we going? What does Bush v. Gore tell us about this? I'll be back with your calls right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The Supreme Court this morning having hearings on Bush, revisiting Bush v. Gore in a way. We'll be right back. And welcome back, Pat in Puerto Rico. Hey, Pat, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey there. As I heard the justices on the left and right both use, the classic founding fathers and speak of those men as almost deities, I wish someone would just say, this is a flawed document. They were flawed men. They included slavery. They didn't have women have the right to vote. Even only rich white men could vote. Yep. And so, and the fact that that they have the Electoral College, the political racist compromise that is why the Trump's insurrection and their scheme about throwing it to Congress was even possible. If we didn't have this winner take all for each state and just counted each vote, every man, every woman, every citizen above 18, it would obliviate all of these issues that we've been dealing with for the past years since Trump appeared on the scene.
Well, since Bush,
and
really.
Even election interference would be that much harder. How could you'd have to ring systems, to swing millions of votes on one side or another. Yep. So anyway, that's it would
also make elections national. Right now, 90% of all the election money is spent in about 8 states. And and if it was a national popular vote, people would have to campaign nationwide, which would change the nature of the campaigns and would, I think, encourage voter participation and engagement. So, yeah, excellent point.
Exactly. All right. Thank you for your time and great show.
Thank you, Pat. Very well said. Thank you. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. Todd in Aurora, Colorado. Hey, Todd, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just kind of wanted to add to a couple points. One, what your last caller said, too, I agree. I was really taken back when Justice Thomas pressed the Colorado plaintiff about, the historical precedent. And, he said, well, the ballots weren't really there or anything like that. The other thing that is really different from then is the Electoral College. It functioned differently. If you read, Federalist 68, Hamilton thought it was going to be a bunch of wise
elders.
Elders, right. So that, it doesn't function like it should. Yeah. And the other point I wanted to raise was really concerning when they were trying to press the Trump attorney a little bit, was talking about how do you execute the, the third term, being, barred from serving that, and who would implement that? Who would make sure that actually is abided by too?
Yeah.
I think if we get Trump elected, he's going to try for a third term, and probably no one to stop him.
Absolutely. I mean, he's already said so on multiple occasions, and I have no hope that if Donald Trump is elected, we're going to have anything resembling a constitutional democratic republic going forward. Because and I base that entirely on things that he himself has said.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, he's bragged about it. Donald Trump 2024, Donald Trump 2028, Donald Trump 2032. I'll be here, quack, quack, quack. So yeah, I'm with you, Todd, and it's setting a horrible precedent, and it's damaging our country. Todd, thank you for the call. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. I'll be back with more of your calls in 60 seconds. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and onto God what is God's. This is the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said the only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here, 21 minutes past the hour. Jake in Seattle. Hey, Jake, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'm hoping you can help me out here. Win the water cooler wars. I work with some Republicans, and I know when I talk to them about this, they're going to say, well, Donald Trump hasn't been convicted of insurrection. A jury hasn't found him guilty. And I'm curious, how can I respond, when to the layman, that's what matters, a jury of our peers?
A judge or jury. Because in our legal system, you have a choice, a judge or a jury. And what happened in Colorado, and Donald Trump was given an opportunity to come and make his defense. He was invited, and his lawyers actually did show up, but he never showed up. But in district court, in state district court in Colorado, a judge ruled ultimately, after hearing the evidence, after hearing, they had people from the Capitol Police come in and present evidence. They had Donald Trump's lawyers come in and say, no, it wasn't an insurrection. They heard the evidence, and this judge ruled, yes, he committed insurrection. No, he should not be removed from the ballot. That then got appealed to the Colorado Supreme Court, and the Colorado Supreme Court, again, looked at all of the evidence and all of the testimony, and they said, yes, he did commit insurrection, and therefore he must be removed from the ballot. And that's why this is before the Supreme Court, because two different courts found Donald Trump guilty of insurrection.
And I understand that, Tom, and you don't have to convince me. I was awake in November and December of 2020, but I don't believe he was in those cases were regarding his eligibility on the ballot, not whether or not he committed insurrection. Am I misundersting that?
Yes, you are, Jake. The entire.
How am I going to convince Republicans?
Well, I doubt you can, but. The case that was before the district court, Judge Henderson, as I recall, the case that was before the district court in Colorado specifically was, is Donald Trump disqualified from being on the ballot because he committed an insurrection? And the question of whether or not he committed an insurrection, not the question of whether or not he's qualified to be on the ballot, but the question of whether or not he committed an insurrection was the predicating question of the entire case. If the judge had ruled that he had not committed insurrection, it never would have gone to the Colorado Supreme Court, or it may have under appeal, but it may have turned out quite differently. But the judge ruled, yes, he committed insurrection. He's been found guilty of insurrection by two courts.
I'll try to get it through their thick skull.
Yeah.
I'll try to get this through their thick skull at work. Appreciate you.
Good luck with that, Jake. Thanks for the call. Gordon in Los Angeles. Hey, Gordon, what's up?
Hey, Tom.
Hey.
Love your show. Thank you for taking my call.
My pleasure.
This is in the area of if Donald Trump is an officer, if he can be titled an officer. Well, I've pulled up the text from his immunity trial, his immunity case,
right,
and the decision. I guess I don't know how to name it. This page 24, section 24, at the bottom of the first paragraph. It says, but as the Supreme Court has unequivocally explained, no man in this country is so high that he is above the law.
Correct.
No officer of the law may set that law at defiance with impunity. All the officers of the government, from the highest to the lowest, are creatures of the law and are bound to obey it.
Right, and Trump is arguing that he's not an officer and he never took the oath of an officer because he never served in Congress or the military.
Well, this is saying that the president, but I'm pretty sure that there's other text in here because I heard it where they referred to Trump, Donald Trump, as an officer.
Right. Oh yeah. In my mind, there's no doubt that the president is an officer of the government. I mean, the presidency is an office of the government. that is mentioned 20 times in the Constitution. So, there's... go ahead.
But wouldn't that why doesn't that, dispel this argument that, he is not an officer?
Well, the argument that they're making,
and it
Gordon,
applies to the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, the argument that they're making is that because the president's oath is slightly different from the oath that you take as a member of Congress or as a police officer or when you join the military, and it says support the Constitution rather than defend the Constitution, or maybe it's the other way around, but it's slightly different. The wording is slightly different. What they're saying is that, therefore, the president, A, the president's not an officer, and B, any other previous president in the history of the United States could still be impeached, or could still be kept off the ballot, rather, because they were all officers, because all of them, every other president except Donald Trump, either served in the military or served in Congress, or both, before they became president. And so they all took that oath of the officer of the United States. Trump, who got out of the military because of his so-called bone spurs, and who never ran for public office and so never took an oath of office, is claiming that the president's oath is slightly different, and therefore he's not an officer and he's immune. And, as weird as it sounds, that argument may end up prevailing before the Supreme Court. Gordon, I got to run, but thanks for the call. We'll continue the conversation right after this break. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where we dare to ask, is Donald Trump an insurrectionist? And we dare to say, yeah. Are you kidding me? We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled The Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia,
An American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name: the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, "Oh, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control." With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. The book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Craig in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Hey, Craig, what's on your mind today?
Oh, yeah. I didn't catch the court this morning, so this is a little bit off the review of what was going on. But J. Michael Littig, and I'm not sure about Lawrence Tribe on this. Both those guys seem to be on the same page. Points out that the violation that is important to understand is that the executive investiture clause requires the President of the United States to step down from power peacefully as part of the duties of the President of the United States. And the violation of that clause is, by definition, an insurrection. This is the insurrection that Trump should be held accountable for. It's clear cut. He worked hard against all evidence that it was a free and fair election.
Right.
And he violated his executive investiture clause.
Interesting. I'm unfamiliar with that, Craig. But thanks for the tip on it. I can't speak to it because I'm not, I don't know anything about it. I'll have to look it up. Is that a clause in the Constitution?
It's a YouTube video. I was doom scrolling this, and it's in the Constitution. And I should have got some research, but I just got home, got something to eat. I got to go get the boy from school. I wasn't able to look up
the details
on it. But
it's
if
all
you
good.
YouTube,
I'll do it. I'll look it up myself. Craig, thank you. Thanks for the tip on that. I appreciate it. Rudy in Atlanta. Hey, Rudy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I want to quickly say this. You and Joe Madison are probably the two most decent men that I know, and I just want to tell you thank you.
Well,
I want to thank you for all the knowledge and wisdom you guys spread. That being said, Tom, I never thought that I'll be hearing what I'm hearing. I've never thought that I hear white men twist themselves up in pretzels over a position that's probably, in my mind, supposed to be one of the most dignified positions on earth. This guy is clearly, Tom, this is hard. This is hard to hear people twist themselves like this over a guy like Donald Trump. This is hard.
Yeah.
And I want to say this, and like I told Jefferson when I last spoke to him, we're at a point right now where white men are going to have to come to terms with where they are and where they want to be going forward in this country. They know, most white men know that this guy is a turd. Now, whether they speak up and stomp this out, it's beyond me. But now is the time for good white men to step up.
Come to the aid of their country.
That's what I want to see, Tom.
Yeah, I'm with you, Rudy.
Where else you going to go?
Yeah, I think what's going on with the Supreme Court and all of the contortionism that we heard this morning, to use your metaphor, is that they're terrified. I think that they are genuinely frightened. I mean, these people don't live in giant 30-room mansions with Praetorian Guard like Elon Musk does, or Jeff Bezos does. They are not invulnerable. They do have security, but they are not invulnerable. And I think, frankly, they are terrified that if they keep Trump off the ballot, that somebody's going to come and burn their house down or kill their kids.
Well, I mean, Tom, the way I see it as a black man, either way it goes, you're going to have to carry the water.
Yep.
There is no sweet answer to this.
Yeah.
You're going to have to face some things and go with it. But this clearly right here isn't going to end well, especially if you deal with Trump.
Yeah.
You can't outrun a lot, Tom. You can't outrun it.
Yep.
Period.
Yep. I agree with you, Rudy. I agree with you. Thank you, and thanks for your kind words. It's being in the same class with Joe Madison is a great honor.
Man, you deserve every day of it, Tom. Love you, man. Take care.
Thank you, Rudy. Nice to hear from you. Thank you so much. Paul in Zillow, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Well, hi, Tom, and thanks to all you at the program for putting on this interesting conversation.
Sure.
My comment is this question of the office of the president.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know that Donald Trump is a liar. But this is what he said. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States, and that's all capitalized, and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Correct.
He accepted he was taking office.
Yep.
Can't you throw that whole...
but does that make him an officer? That's the how many angels fit on the head of a pin question that was being debated this morning.
Well, since every other government employee practically takes one that says he's also going to take office, yes, that makes you an officer.
Yeah.
I don't know if the enlisted men have to take that oath, but I know that anybody, once they become an officer in the military, has to solemnly swear that they will defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
They do. It's a slightly different oath, though, than the president's oath. And
it is.
And,
it is.
And this is.
I'm not sure that that's a good idea. That it's a different oath, because I think the first one that everybody takes is more comprehensive.
Well, I think what's insane is that we're saying, because there's two different oaths that both say you're either going to protect or you're going to defend the Constitution, that they mean different things. I think that's a complete BS argument. But it's, these guys are getting, what was the earlier caller in the first hour? He said it's Jesuitical. They're like, the St. Thomas Aquinas, sitting, debating the subtle nuances of angels. They're just desperately trying to find a way to not piss off Donald Trump's followers, in my opinion. And
I think you are very right about that. I think that people do become afraid of these fascists who have large numbers of people.
And that's how fascists win, by the way.
Acolytes.
That's how fascists win. I mean, when Mussolini marched on Rome in 1922, I think it was, with his 20,000 black shirts, and this was the equivalent of the Proud Boys. This was a 100% volunteer militia, right? When he marched on Rome, the king just freaked out and said, "Okay, all right, you're in charge. Okay, don't kill me." And I mean, this is how fascists, and Hitler, when he took power, what did he do? The Night of the Long Knives, he killed the people on his side who weren't quite loyal enough. As Donald Trump hasn't killed people who weren't quite loyal enough, but he's certainly gotten rid of a lot of them. Politically. And now he's talking about wanting to kill him. He said he wants to put Mattis in front of a firing squad. And if he becomes president, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he actually did that. So, Paul, I got to move along, but I agree with you. I think the entire argument is nuts. Rob in Mesa, Arizona. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today?
I agree with that argument being nuts, because if he wasn't an officer, then why does everyone salute him?
Yeah, there's a good question, too.
Otherwise they
what
just
the hell does
like
officer mean, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. Hey, the one thing I wanted to say about the Supreme Court ruling is if they basically allow the states to go ahead and kick them off the ballot, I mean, there is a remedy in that whole movement that says basically that the Congress can override it by 2/3. So let's say, Colorado says he's not qualified to be on it. They can just have a 2/3 vote, and it's in Congress's hand again to do that.
That's
because
correct.
Otherwise, and the only other problem I have with it is if they do allow it, you don't want the red state saying, "Oh, we're going to look for this guy to see if he has a traffic violation," and then
well, that's different from insurrection.
Able to run. No, I got you there, but and that would obviously be challenged as. I just don't want to open a can of worms, but I think there's just no clean way out of this, because no matter what you do, that Trump crowd, the MAGA crowd, is not going to take anything but him being president as an answer.
Yeah.
So
I know.
And so even if they allow it, it's not going to work. So let's say they disallow it and he runs for election. Even if he loses by a landslide, they're still not going to believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just no clean way out of it.
No, you're absolutely right. And they want their dictator. I mean, it's just they want Big Daddy. They want the guy who's going to tell them everything's going to be good. I'll take care of you. Don't worry. Just give me everything. Rob, I got to run.
Ends justify the means.
There you go. Yep. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's just a couple seconds. It'll be 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the place where smart people get their news. I'll be right back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Harry in Fort Myers, Florida. Hey, Harry, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good. Nice talking to you, Tom. First-time caller, long-time listener.
Thank you. What's up?
And, I think my opinion is I think that the Supreme Court is adjudicating the wrong issue. Keeping him off the ballot is not the issue per se, because theoretically he could be a write-in at some point in time.
Right.
What they should be debating is whether the Supreme Court decision in Colorado that found him guilty of insurrection should be adjudicated. Therefore, if the Supreme Court found that he did, in fact, commit insurrection, he could be banned from holding office.
Well, they did. I mean, that was the conclusion of the Supreme Court in Colorado.
In Colorado, but that's what needs to be appealed and ultimately decided by the Supreme Court, not the ballot question.
Treason. Do you mean treason? I mean, literally treason, or are you using that word as a stand-in for insurrection?
I misspoke. I meant insurrection.
Okay. Because treason has a somewhat different meaning.
And also aiding and abetting.
Right. They completely avoided that this morning. I mean, there was like in the last 20 minutes or so, there was about 3 or 4 sentences that had to do with whether he was guilty of insurrection. And, you know, the Colorado, it wasn't the Attorney General, it was the Solicitor General, said that, you know, we found him guilty of insurrection. And they just kind of said, okay, let's move along. It's like they don't want to talk about that. They wanted to find... And it seemed like everybody was in on this, or at least among the liberals. Elena Kagan was certainly in on it. They wanted to find some excuse to leave Trump on the ballot. And like I said, I think it's because they're afraid their houses will get burned down. But, you know, who knows? Harry, I got to move along. Thank you. Thank you for the call. Good to hear from you. David in New York City. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, Tom. My first time calling, too. I've been listening to you since the old White Rose.
Oh, wow.
Podcast.
That's a long time.
Long time. Anyway, I just kind of want to bring to your attention. So I watched the initial trial where the 14th Amendment professor basically testified on the stand to the judge in Colorado. And he went through a whole bunch of evidence. It was really fascinating to watch the whole, 6-hour testimony from him. But one of the things that he brought up was that the term chief executive officer is something that's been around for a very long time. It actually makes its first appearance in 1782.
Really? Wow.
Yes,
so I'm completely wrong on that.
In 1782, basically it was when an ordinance of the Congress of the Confederation of the United States of America used the term to refer to governors and other leaders of executive branches of each of the 13 colonies.
Right.
In addition to that, this professor went through many other examples of, presidents in their correspondences with foreign leaders, such and such. As the chief executive officer of the United States of America, I'm presenting this to you. I'm writing this. And then also in court opinions all the way through, the 1800s and also during this period of Reconstruction.
Right.
That was kind of, and so he basically was bringing it up that this was what was the common parlance for that. It wasn't until the 1900s, 1974, I think to be precise, that it was actually used as a business term and as an acronym for CEO.
That's fascinating. I learn things from my listeners and my callers all the time. David, thank you for educating me.
No problem.
I appreciate it. It's step by step, right? We'll be back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag you're it. When I was a little kid, my grandmother had a piano and I loved to play it. I was incompetent, but I was figuring out all kinds of stuff. And then I kind of got away from it and, went to school and things got busy and just lost track of it. Well, now there's this fascinating new study out of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, that is making me think maybe I should go back and learn the piano. What they found was that they took a group of 132 healthy older adults, retired, 62 to 78 years old. Half of them learned the piano, half of them took music classes without learning the piano. And what they found was that those who learned the piano actually had the strongest increase in their memory, in their mental competence, their mental faculties. Those who took the music classes also did well, but learning the piano was a huge step. So check it out. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. I am right back. It's Oh, my. James in Spokane. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Hi, y'all. I got to repeat again, justice delayed is justice denied, Tom, and all these things. Justice Roberts, somebody should be reading this stuff for them and reminding them what they're saying and how they say it when it's unprepared text. Is he kidding? Talking about not wanting to set a precedent and affecting the electoral landscape across the country.
Right.
That's what law's about.
Yeah.
That's what law is. That's what you put in code and statute is precedent, and you affirm it by putting it into law.
Yeah.
That's all it is. So, I mean, somebody should read this for him and tell him what he said.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
It's very oblique.
I agree. And I think that there are, at the very least, Alito and Thomas, perhaps Roberts, but certainly Alito and Thomas, very much want Donald Trump back as president, in my opinion. They want that strong man, that authoritarian. They would be very comfortable with a fascist form of government. The others, the rest of them, I think they're just terrified. But again, this is purely speculation on my part. James, thank you. Thank you for your comments. Dan in Chicago. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
I just had a question. Have you ever figured out who put those gallows up on the 6th?
To the best of my knowledge, no, which is shocking, right? I mean, it's like everybody was filming that. The Capitol has its own security cameras. They have to know who did that.
You'd think so. And what agency is supposed to investigate that?
FBI. It's federal property, so it'd be the federal and the preeminent federal police force is the FBI. I mean, arguably the Capitol Police, but
How about the Secret Service?
Yeah, or this. Well, no, the Secret Service protects the president. They don't protect members of Congress.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Good to hear from you, Pat. I think they don't protect members of Congress. I might be wrong on that. Pat in Waterloo, Iowa. Hey, Pat, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Mr. Hartmann, thanks for your great program. And I just wanted to bring up something I read today on a CNN site from Tristan Snell, who's a lawyer, one of the lead lawyers in the Trump University investigation. And he says in his opinion that Congress has already found two things as a result of the second impeachment for Trump's incitement of insurrection.
But he was not convicted.
But number one was that January 6, 2021 was an insurrection. And number two, that Trump not only engaged in, but incited it. Now, the Constitution governs how that conviction occurs. But it's notable that on bipartisan votes, from the people that, or from the persons that were put in both the House and the Senate, that by majority votes of 232 to 203, the House voted that he was guilty of both of those. And then even though the Senate didn't meet the 67 threshold, they still voted by majority, 57 to 43, that he engaged in, and that January 6th was an insurrection. So people that think that you got to have an impeachment with those rules in place need to keep in mind that the majority of our representatives voted that he did engage in that, and that the 6th was an insurrection.
Yeah. If he had been, if the senators if a handful of Republican senators had the courage of their convictions and kept with what they were saying immediately after January 6th, I'm thinking Mitch McConnell in particular here, history would be quite different. Donald Trump would not have, had he been convicted, he would not have been able to run for re-election. I mean, that's another one of those qualifications, right, where you're disqualified.
Right.
So, yeah, I get your point, Pat. I do think that the failure of a conviction in the Senate is the fatal flaw in that logic, but or at least from the Supreme Court's point of view. But I'm not disagreeing with it. Pat, thank you for the call. Patsy in Yakima, Washington. Hey, Patsy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Quick question. Doesn't Commander-in-Chief make him technically an officer?
You would think. Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, that's where you're in charge of everybody. Hello.
Right. Well, at least he's commander-in-chief of the military is what it says in the Constitution. So, Yeah,
but he has that title.
Right, I know. This whole argument that he's not an officer is just bizarre. I think that what's going on here is they're grasping at straws. These Supreme Court justices, and I think it's sad, frankly. Patsy, thank you. Stuart in Everett, Washington. Hey, Stuart, you got a quick one? I got about 25 seconds here.
Yeah, Tom, one of the justices asked a question if releasing money to a foreign government was aiding the enemy. And I think that's a direct information that Biden should be impeached for doing that.
Oh, geez. Seriously? All right. Well, I heard Trump's rant this morning about Iran. I got it. Stuart, I got to run, but thank you for the call. With us today. Fascinating day, right? A fascinating day. We'll continue the conversation tomorrow. It's Anything Goes Friday. Do we have any guests tomorrow, Sean? Oh, Congressman Khanna will be with us for the first hour of the program. So, we'll see you then tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great afternoon, and we'll catch up with you on the other side.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.